Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the most disturbing sexual practices of the Victorian era. What you're about to discover might shatter your notions of prudish corsets and tea parties. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the grand theatre of history, the Victorian era is like a prim aunt who swears she never danced on tables in her youth, but you know she totally did. Behind the lace curtains and stiff collars, Victorians were juggling some pretty wild ideas about sex and morality. It's the age of Queen Victoria herself, a time when modesty was more than a virtue. It was practically a national pastime. Yet, beneath this prudish facade, a whirlpool of peculiar sexual practices was brewing, fueled by strict moral codes, bizarre medical beliefs, and even some rather inventive technology. Let's start with the infamous Victorian obsession with modesty. It was as if the entire society had collectively decided that the human body was far too scandalous to be acknowledged. Ladies were swathed in layers of fabric that could probably double as parachutes, and gentlemen were buttoned up like they were competing in a contest to see who could wear the most fabric without fainting from heatstroke. But here's the kicker. While they were busy pretending that sex was something that only happened in darkened rooms and never discussed at the dinner table, the Victorians were also busy inventing some of the strangest sexual practices history has ever seen. Take the chastity belt, for instance. Now, these devices are often associated with the Middle Ages, but let's not forget that the Victorians had a peculiar love affair with medieval nostalgia. They dusted off this old concept and gave it a new twist. The idea was simple: create a device that would prevent women from engaging in sexual activities, whether consensual or otherwise. Never mind that the design often caused more harm than good, with metal contraptions that were about as comfortable as wearing a steel corset. Comfort was clearly not the priority here. Victorians also had some rather eyebrow-raising ideas about preventing self-abuse, a term that makes modern audiences chuckle, but was no laughing matter back then. Doctors and moralists of the time were convinced that masturbation could lead to a host of health problems, from blindness to insanity. To combat this, they recommended devices like spiked rings and alarms that would sound if the wearer got a little too excited during sleep. Yes, it sounds like something out of a Monty Python sketch, but this was real life for some unfortunate souls. You might wonder how these practices could ever take root in a society that seemed outwardly so prudish. Well, the answer lies in the era's medical beliefs, which were about as scientific as a witch doctor's potion. Victorian doctors had a thing for diagnosing hysteria in women, a condition that was blamed for everything from anxiety to sexual arousal. The prescribed cure: pelvic massages that, quite frankly, sound more like a Saturday night at a questionable salon than a medical treatment. These sessions were so popular that they eventually led to the invention of the vibrator, initially a medical device to save doctors from fatigue. And here we thought the Victorians were all about stiff upper lips and afternoon tea. But the peculiarities didn't stop there. The era's moral codes were as rigid as a starched cravat, yet they lived alongside a booming prostitution industry. London alone was home to an estimated 80,000 prostitutes by the mid-19th century, a number that would make even the most liberal modern city blush. This was a society that preached chastity, but thrived on a thriving underground economy of illicit encounters. The infamous Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860 were introduced to combat the spread of venereal diseases within the armed forces, allowing police to arrest women suspected of being prostitutes and subject them to invasive medical examinations. It was a law that cried out for reform, and reform it eventually got, thanks to activists like Josephine Butler, who campaigned tirelessly against such draconian measures. In the end, the Victorian era was a paradox, a time when public decency masked private peculiarity. It was a world where technology, medicine, and morality collided in the most unexpected ways, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate us. So, next time you see a portrait of a stern-looking Victorian, remember, behind that stiff-collared exterior was a society grappling with some rather extraordinary sexual dynamics, not unlike our own, but wrapped in the most extravagant veneer of all. And speaking of paradoxes, let's dive deeper into the Victorian bedroom, a place where gender roles and class distinctions were as rigid as the era's infamous corsetry. Victorian society was a tapestry woven with threads of empire and repression, where public propriety often masked private peculiarities. It was a time when the British Empire was expanding faster than a waistline at an all-you-can-eat buffet, yet its citizens were living in a world of sexual denial that would give even the most repressed reality TV star a run for their money. You see, gender roles in the Victorian era were as rigidly defined as a Victorian gentleman's top hat. Men were the breadwinners, the public faces of the household, while women were expected to be paragons of virtue, angels of the house, if you will. This wasn't just societal fluff. It was practically enshrined in law and custom. Women had few rights and even fewer opportunities for independence. A Victorian wife was expected to be the epitome of purity and subservience, her worth often measured by her ability to produce heirs and manage a household with the precision of a Swiss watch. But here's where things get spicy. The same society that demanded chastity and modesty from its women was also obsessed with the idea of female hysteria, a so-called medical condition blamed on everything from a wandering uterus. Yes, really, to sexual frustration. To combat this ailment, doctors prescribed pelvic massages and other treatments that sound suspiciously more like a 19th century version of a spa day than serious medical intervention. It's a little hard to imagine a world where a woman could be both a symbol of chastity and a frequent visitor to her physician for some rather intimate therapy. And let's not forget the class distinctions that dictated everything from the kind of underwear you wore to how much privacy you could afford. Privacy was a luxury reserved for the upper classes, who could afford grand homes with separate bedrooms and servants to manage the day-to-day drudgery. For the working class, privacy was as elusive as a coherent plotline in a soap opera. Many families lived in cramped conditions, often sharing one-room apartments with thin walls where the concept of a private moment was about as foreign as a weekend getaway to Paris. Yet, despite these constraints, Victorians found ways to seek pleasure and privacy. The upper classes, for instance, had the luxury of country estates and city homes to indulge in extramarital affairs that were often as much about social climbing as they were about romance. Meanwhile, the working class had to be more resourceful, often resorting to parks, alleys, and other public spaces for their intimate encounters. The dichotomy here is deliciously ironic. A society that prided itself on public decency found itself turning a blind eye to the very human need for connection and pleasure. So, what drove these behaviors? Economic factors played a huge role. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, creating vast wealth for some and grinding poverty for others. The middle class was burgeoning, yet the gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the River Thames. It's no wonder people sought solace in relationships, however unconventional, as a means of escape from the grinding realities of daily life. Now, let's tackle another Victorian myth, the idea that the era was all about prudery and repression. In reality, the Victorians were as complex as a mystery novel, filled with twists and turns that defy simple categorization. They were a society obsessed with cataloging, classifying, and understanding the world around them, yet they struggled with understanding themselves. It's this contradiction that makes the Victorian era so endlessly fascinating, a time when technological advancements and moral rigidity collided in ways that shaped modern society. Take, for instance, the burgeoning field of psychology, which was just beginning to scratch the surface of human sexuality. While Freud was still a few decades away from publishing his theories, the seeds of modern psychology were being planted in the Victorian era. This was a time when people were starting to question long-held beliefs about gender, sexuality, and morality. It was a time of introspection and experimentation, even if the public face of society remained one of restraint and conservatism. And what about the empire? Ah, the British Empire, the jewel in the Victorian crown, expanding across continents like a particularly aggressive game of risk. This imperial expansion brought not just wealth and power, but also exposure to new cultures and ideas. It was a time when the world was getting smaller, yet the Victorian mindset remained insular, wrapped in a cocoon of its own making. The empire was both a source of pride and a breeding ground for the very tensions and contradictions that defined the era. Yet, for all their faults and foibles, the Victorians were pioneers in their own right, laid the groundwork for many of the freedoms we take for granted today, even if their methods were sometimes questionable. They were a society caught between the old world and the new, grappling with the same questions of identity and morality that continue to challenge us today. So, as we peek behind the curtains of the Victorian bedroom, we find a world that is both familiar and foreign, a world where gender roles and class distinctions dictated intimate relationships, but where human desire found a way to flourish despite the odds. And as we continue our journey through the quirks and contradictions of this fascinating era, let's keep in mind that history, much like life itself, is rarely as simple as it seems. Stay tuned for more revelations about how our prim and proper ancestors navigated the choppy waters of love, lust, and societal expectations. Now, speaking of navigating choppy waters, let's wade into the Victorian obsession with medical interventions that were about as scientific as a palm reading at a carnival. Picture this. The 19th century was a time when doctors were straddling the line between medieval superstition and modern medicine, and sometimes they fell off the tightrope altogether. Enter the quack doctors, a breed of medical mavericks who could sell snake oil to a snake and convince a hypochondriac that a good dose of arsenic would sort them right out. The Victorians were endlessly fascinated with the notion of curing sexual disorders, and boy, did they have some creative solutions. Take, for example, the practice of bloodletting, which was still all the rage in the early part of the era. The idea was simple. Drain some of your blood to balance the humors, those mythical fluids believed to control health and temperament. Never mind that it probably left patients feeling more like a deflated balloon than a cured individual. It was a time when the medical field was still shaking off the shackles of ancient beliefs, and new ideas were bubbling up like a pot of particularly questionable stew. The diagnosis of hysteria is perhaps the most infamous of these Victorian medical curiosities. It was a catch-all term for any ailment that couldn't be easily pigeonholed, especially when it came to women. Feeling anxious, hysteria. A bit too spirited for your husband's liking, definitely hysteria. The remedy, pelvic massages performed by your friendly neighborhood doctor, which, let's be honest, sounds more like a euphemism than actual treatment. It's no wonder that these so-called therapies were as popular as they were controversial, eventually giving rise to the invention of the vibrator. Originally a medical device, the vibrator was designed to relieve the doctors of hand cramps, an unintended consequence of their newfound specialty. The economic side of these medical practices is where things get particularly intriguing. You see, Victorian society was as much about making a quick buck as it was about moral rectitude. Quack doctors, with their flashy advertisements and pseudo-scientific jargon, peddled all sorts of remedies to a public eager to believe in miracle cures. Pamphlets and posters promised everything from the restoration of lost vigor to the rekindling of marital bliss, all for the right price. It was a booming industry, with London alone home to hundreds of these medical entrepreneurs, each more flamboyant than the last. And let's not forget the era's fascination with the healing power of electricity. Electrotherapy was all the rage, with devices like the electropathic belt promising to cure everything from impotence to indigestion. These belts were essentially glorified battery packs that delivered a mild electric current to the wearer. The Victorians truly believed that a little jolt of electricity could restore their vim and vigor. It's hard not to chuckle at the image of a Victorian gentleman strapping on his belt and waiting for that magical surge of energy, like a human light bulb trying to flicker into life. But why were these practices so appealing? Part of it was the sheer novelty. Victorians were living in an age of technological marvels, from steam engines to telegraphs, and the idea that science could solve their personal woes was intoxicating. There was also a deep-seated belief in progress, a conviction that humanity was on the cusp of unlocking nature's secrets. In this context, it's not surprising that people were willing to experiment with newfangled treatments, even if they were a tad outlandish. Of course, the question of who could afford these treatments is another story. The burgeoning middle class, flush with the fruits of the Industrial Revolution, was particularly susceptible to the allure of medical innovation. They had the means and the desire to keep up with the Joneses, even when it came to matters of health and wellness. Meanwhile, the working class had to make do with more traditional remedies, relying on herbal concoctions and home-brewed potions passed down through generations. Yet, despite the quackery and the oddball treatments, the Victorian medical field was laying the groundwork for future advancements. The era saw the rise of public health initiatives, the establishment of hospitals, and the professionalization of medicine. It was a time of transition, when old beliefs were being challenged and new ideas were taking root. The quack doctors, with their outlandish claims, were a symptom of this transitional period, a reminder that progress is often a messy, unpredictable process. As we continue our journey through the eccentric world of Victorian medicine, it becomes clear that this era was as much about experimentation as it was about tradition. The Victorians were grappling with questions of health and sexuality in ways that were both innovative and absurd, a reflection of a society caught between the past and the future. So, as we leave behind the quack doctors and their questionable cures, let's keep in mind that history, like medicine, is a field where the lines between genius and folly are often blurred. Stay tuned as we delve further into the peculiarities of Victorian sexual practices, where the boundaries of decency and desire were constantly being tested. As we leave behind the dubious delights of Victorian medical practices, let's take a stroll into the bustling arena of social reform movements, a world where corsets were as tight as societal expectations, but minds were beginning to loosen. Welcome to the age of suffragettes and free love advocates, where the status quo was about to get a much-needed shake-up. Now, when you think of the Victorian era, your mind might conjure images of starchy petticoats and stern faces. But here's the kicker. Amidst all that starch and sternness, a simmering undercurrent of rebellion was bubbling up like a pot of particularly feisty stew. It was a time when courageous souls decided that enough was enough, and they were ready to take the stage with the kind of gusto that would make a Shakespearean actor blush. First up, let's tip our hats to the suffragettes. Picture them, women clad in long skirts, brandishing placards, and demanding the right to vote in a society that considered them little more than decorative houseplants. These were the OG rebels, the ones who dared to challenge a system that was as rigid as a Victorian gentleman's mustache wax. They were led by fearless figures like Emmeline Pankhurst, a name that should be as familiar as your favorite brand of tea. Pankhurst and her crew were not content to merely sit and sip. They were ready to rattle some cages. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were chaining themselves to railings, breaking windows, and going on hunger strikes to make their voices heard. The suffrage movement was a response to an era that treated women as second-class citizens. Think about it. In 1850, a married woman in Britain had about as many rights as a garden gnome. She couldn't own property, her earnings belonged to her husband, and her opinions were often dismissed as hysterical. But as industrialization churned on, women found themselves working in factories and offices, contributing to the economy, but denied a say in how that economy was run. It was an outrageous oversight, and the suffragettes weren't having any of it. Their struggle wasn't just about the vote, though. It was a demand for recognition, for equality, for the simple acknowledgement that women were more than just decorative flourishes in the societal tapestry. The suffragettes were fighting for the right to be seen as individuals, not mere appendages to their husbands or fathers. And while the road was long and the battles many, they eventually achieved victory with the Representation of the People Act 1918, which granted voting rights to women over 30. It's a milestone that today's activists still celebrate, even as they continue to push for progress. But wait, there's more. In the midst of this fight for suffrage, another movement was gaining traction, one that would make many a Victorian monocle pop right out of its socket. Enter the free love advocates, a group that believed love should be as unencumbered by legal and societal constraints as a bird on the wing. These radicals were the 19th century equivalent of rock stars, challenging the conventional notions of marriage and monogamy with a panache that would make even the most rebellious modern-day celebrity nod in approval. The concept of free love was a direct response to the rigid institution of marriage, which was often more about property and progeny than passion. In an era when marriages could be as loveless as a 3-day-old sandwich, the idea that love should be free and unfettered was revolutionary. Free love advocates believed that true relationships were based on mutual affection and respect, not legal contracts or social expectations. One of the most vocal proponents of this movement was Victoria Woodhull, a name that deserves a spotlight brighter than a Victorian gas lamp. In the 1870, she became the first woman to run for President of the United States, advocating for a society where love was liberated from the shackles of convention. Woodhull argued that women should have the freedom to choose whom they loved and how they expressed that love, without the interference of the state or the church. Her ideas were scandalous at the time, viewed as a threat to the moral fabric of society. Yet, they sparked conversations that would echo into the 20th century and beyond. The appeal of the free love movement lay in its idealism, a promise of a world where love was pure and egalitarian, untainted by the power dynamics of marriage. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was often messier. The movement faced backlash from conservatives, who saw it as a slippery slope to societal chaos. And while the ideas were progressive, they sometimes overlooked the practical implications of such radical change in a world that wasn't quite ready to shed its Victorian skin. Both the suffragettes and the free love advocates were navigating a landscape riddled with societal landmines. They were challenging deeply entrenched norms in a society that viewed change with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for foreign cheeses. Yet, despite the odds, they persevered. Their courage was as audacious as it was necessary, and their legacy is one of progress and empowerment. So, what drove these movements? Economic factors played a significant role. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the social and economic landscape, creating a burgeoning middle class and shifting the balance of power. Women were entering the workforce in droves, yet their societal roles remained unchanged, a contradiction that demanded resolution. Meanwhile, the rise of new political ideologies, like socialism and feminism, provided fertile ground for revolutionary ideas to take root. The clash between tradition and progress was as spectacular as a fireworks display over the Thames. On one side, you had a society clinging to its Victorian ideals of propriety and decorum. On the other, a new generation eager to break free from the constraints of the past. It was a time of tension and transformation, a period when the old world was colliding with the new in a cacophony of ideas and ideologies. In the end, these reform movements were more than just footnotes in history. They were the vanguard of change. They challenged the status quo, questioned the unquestionable, and laid the groundwork for the freedoms we now take for granted. And while the battles were hard-fought, the victories were sweet, a testament to the power of the human spirit to push for progress, even in the face of adversity. As we continue to explore the intricacies of Victorian society, remember that history is a tapestry woven with the threads of those who dared to dream of a better world. Stay with us as we uncover more stories from this fascinating era, where the past meets the future in a dance as intricate as the steps of a Victorian waltz. Victorian society was a paradox wrapped in a corset, where the tension between repression and rebellion created a legacy that's still echoing today like a particularly persistent ghost in the attic. The era's sexual practices and attitudes, often as convoluted as a steampunk novel, have left an indelible mark on our modern perceptions of sexuality. So, let's peel away the layers of lace and propriety to uncover how the Victorians' prudish yet peculiar approach to sex still influences us today. First off, let's talk about modesty, a concept the Victorians had down to an art form. Their obsession with covering up every inch of skin, except perhaps the earlobes, was practically a national sport. Fast forward to today, and we see echoes of this in the way we still struggle with body image and modesty. The Victorian ideal of the demure, covered woman lingers like a shadow over modern fashion, where debates about appropriate dress continue to rage on social media platforms with the fervor of a 19th century temperance lecture. But modesty wasn't just about clothing. It was a full-blown lifestyle choice that extended into the bedroom, where the Victorians managed to make sex sound as thrilling as a tax audit. This era's penchant for privacy and decorum has trickled down through the generations, influencing today's societal norms around discussing sexual health and education. While we might not be as tight-lipped as our corset-wearing forebears, there's still a certain coyness when it comes to openly talking about sex. A hangover from the Victorian age that lingers like a stubborn perfume. And then there's the Victorian idea of sexual purity, which was as rigid as a starched collar. The concept of chastity was so ingrained that it spawned an entire industry dedicated to preserving it, from chastity belts to cold baths meant to quell unseemly desires. Today, while we've thankfully moved past the notion that a cold shower is the cure for everything from lust to a bad day, the underlying idea that sexual purity equates to virtue still pops up in discussions about morality and relationships. It's a remnant of the Victorian era that persists, like a sepia-toned photograph tucked in the pages of a family album. Now, let's not forget the era's peculiar medical beliefs, which were about as scientific as a fortune-teller's crystal ball. The hysteria diagnosis and its treatments may seem laughable now, but they were a product of a time when women's sexuality was both feared and misunderstood. Fast forward to the present, and we can see how these attitudes have evolved, or not. The medical community's historical dismissal of women's health issues is a legacy of the Victorian era, a time when a woman's emotional and sexual needs were often trivialized or misunderstood. The economic context of the Victorian era also played its part in shaping sexual attitudes. The Industrial Revolution was a double-edged sword, creating wealth for some while leaving others in grinding poverty. This economic disparity influenced personal relationships and societal norms, with the wealthy indulging in discreet affairs while the working class grappled with the harsh realities of survival. Today, we continue to see how economic status can influence relationship dynamics and access to sexual health resources, a reflection of the Victorian legacy that still lingers in our modern world. But perhaps the most enduring impact of the Victorian era is its dichotomy between public morality and private vice. The era's strict social codes coexisted with a thriving underground of sexual exploration and indulgence. This contradiction is still with us, seen in the way societies publicly endorse certain sexual norms while privately indulging in behaviors that defy those standards. It's a reminder that human nature remains as complex and contradictory as ever, a truth that the Victorians would have understood all too well. As we look back on the quirks and contradictions of Victorian sexual practices, it's clear that the era was a turning point, a time when old beliefs were being challenged and new ideas were beginning to take root. The Victorians were grappling with questions of identity and morality that continue to resonate today, a testament to the enduring complexity of the human experience. So, as we wrap up this journey through the lace-curtained corridors of the past, let's remember that history is never as simple as it seems. It's a tapestry of contradictions and complexities, woven with the threads of human ambition, desire, and folly. In the end, the legacy of the Victorian era is one of both cautionary tales and inspiring progress. It's a reminder that while we've come a long way from the days of chastity belts and hysteria diagnoses, the journey toward understanding and embracing human sexuality is far from over. So here's to the Victorians, with their peculiar mix of prudery and passion. May we learn from their mistakes, celebrate their triumphs, and continue to explore the intricacies of the human heart with the same curiosity and courage. If you've ever wondered who was throwing the wildest parties in ancient Italy before the Romans turned up with their togas and triumphs, look no further than the Etruscans. These mysterious folks were the original cultural influencers, the hipsters of the ancient Mediterranean, if you will, setting trends while everyone else was still figuring out how to tie their sandals. Their origins are a bit of a historical puzzle, scholars scratching their heads like detectives trying to solve a particularly juicy cold case. Our first suspect in the Who Are the Etruscans mystery is the Greek historian Herodotus, who loved a good story almost as much as he loved embellishing it. According to him, the Etruscans were originally Lydians from western Anatolia. Sometime around the 12th century BCE, a famine hit Lydia like a bad hair day that just wouldn't quit. desperate for solutions. The Lydians supposedly played a game of rock, paper, scissors with their future and decided that half of their population would pack up and leave to find a new home. They landed on the shores of Italy, bringing with them their language, culture, and presumably a lot of extra parts. But wait, there's a twist. Modern geneticists, with their fancy labs and DNA wizardry, have thrown a spanner in Herodotus's tale. Studies suggest a significant genetic link between the Etruscans and the people of Anatolia, but the timeline is as tangled as a bowl of spaghetti. It turns out these connections might go back even further than Herodotus imagined, possibly to the Neolithic era. So, in a move worthy of a daytime soap opera, the Etruscans may have been Anatolian all along, without needing to blame it on a Lydian migration. While scholars debate the origins, the Etruscans were busy laying the groundwork for what would become Roman culture. They were the ultimate tastemakers, the kind of people who today will be posting about their latest vineyard tour on Instagram. Their civilization flourished in central Italy, particularly in the region known as Etruria, which stretched across what are now Tuscany, Lazio, and Umbria. You know, the kind of places where people now go to find themselves and drink too much Chianti. And drink they did, out of the fanciest, most elaborately decorated goblets you can imagine. The Etruscans were obsessed with wine, and their drinking culture was as sophisticated as it was extensive. They didn't just sip on it, they threw massive banquets, the kind of events that would put any modern-day wedding to shame. These parties were more than just an excuse to get tipsy. They were a symbol of status and sophistication, and they paved the way for Roman conviviality. Beyond their impressive party scene, the Etruscans were master artisans, and their influence seeped into Roman architecture, religion, and even their alphabet. Yes, the very letters you're reading owe a debt to Etruscan innovation. They were also savvy traders, establishing connections across the Mediterranean. Their cities, like Tarquinia and Cerveteri, were bustling hubs of commerce and culture long before Rome decided to crash the party. Politically, the Etruscans were organized into city-states, each with its own ruler, much like the Greeks. This loose confederation of cities allowed them to maintain a distinct identity while still interacting with their powerful neighbors. And boy, were they neighbors with benefits when it came to cultural exchange. They laid the groundwork for many Roman institutions, including the idea of gladiatorial games, which originally began as Etruscan funeral rites. Talk about a dramatic farewell. But let's not put the Etruscans on too high a pedestal. They had their flaws, too, like a penchant for piracy and a somewhat dubious political system that often led to infighting. Their decline, starting around the 4th century BCE, came at the hands of the rising Roman Republic, which had a knack for absorbing and repurposing what it found useful. By the time Rome was flexing its muscles across the Mediterranean, the Etruscans had been mostly assimilated, their language fading into obscurity faster than you can say Veni, Vidi, Vici. Yet, even in their decline, the Etruscans left an indelible mark on Rome, and by extension, Western civilization. Their art, architecture, and religious practices were the bedrock upon which Rome built its empire. And while the Romans might have been the ones to write the history books, the Etruscans were the trendsetters who showed them how to throw a proper party, and maybe even how to write about it afterward. So the next time you're sipping a glass of wine or marveling at the grandeur of Roman architecture, give a little nod to the Etruscans, the original influencers of the ancient world. Speaking of the Etruscans, and their knack for leaving an indelible mark, let's dive into the canvas of their creativity, art, and architecture. If you ever question the origin of that enigmatic Etruscan smile, perhaps it's because they knew something we didn't. These folks were crafting masterpieces while the rest of the world was still doodling stick figures in the sand. Their art was as vibrant as a Mediterranean sunset, full of life and emotion, and often depicted scenes from their daily lives, mythology, and religious rituals. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the Etruscan temples. These weren't just places of worship. They were architectural marvels that would make even the most seasoned architect do a double take. Imagine buildings that could rival the grandeur of a modern-day skyscraper, minus the steel and glass, of course. The Etruscans were masters of engineering, using materials like wood and terracotta to create structures that were both functional and aesthetically pleasing. These temples often featured elaborate terracotta sculptures, painted woodwork, and columns that supported large, overhanging roofs, partly practical, partly dramatic flair. Take the Temple of Minerva in Veii, for example. This beauty was constructed around 510 BCE and boasted a grand staircase leading up to a triple cella, a fancy way of saying 3 rooms dedicated to different deities. The temple was adorned with stunning terracotta statues, including a life-sized figure of Apollo, who stood proudly on the roof. The Romans might have borrowed the idea of grandiose temples from the Etruscans, but let's give credit where it's due. These structures were the original architectural influencers, setting the stage for centuries of Roman building. But art and architecture were just the tip of the Etruscan iceberg. Let's not forget their prowess in the real estate market. Picture this: a civilization that knew how to play the property game long before it was cool. The Etruscans were the ancient Mediterranean's real estate moguls, savvy traders who knew how to turn a profit faster than you can say, location, location, location. Their cities were strategically placed along trade routes, allowing them to control the flow of goods and amass wealth. Etruria, with its fertile lands and rich mineral resources, was a prime piece of real estate that attracted traders from across the Mediterranean. The Etruscans weren't just buying and selling property. They were creating thriving urban centers that became cultural and economic hubs. Cities like Tarquinia, Cerveteri, and Volsae were bustling metropolises, complete with markets, temples, and public spaces where citizens gathered to socialize and conduct business. These cities were the heart of Etruscan civilization, where art, commerce, and politics intertwined. Economically, the Etruscans were ahead of their time. They were skilled metalworkers, producing bronze and iron goods that were highly sought after by neighboring cultures. Their pottery, often adorned with intricate designs, was another hot commodity. And let's not forget their expertise in agriculture. Etruscan lands were some of the most fertile in the Mediterranean, producing an abundance of crops that fed their people and fueled trade. They even dabbled in winemaking, a skill they passed on to the Romans, who unsurprisingly took it to new heights. However, not everything about Etruscan society was as rosy as their art or as lucrative as their trade. Their society was hierarchical, with a distinct class system that often led to tension. The Etruscans were ruled by a class of aristocrats who controlled wealth and power, while the lower classes toiled in the fields and workshops. This disparity sometimes led to unrest, as the common folk chafed under aristocratic rule. And while the Etruscans were known for their cultural achievements, they were also infamous for their piracy, raiding ships, and coastal settlements in search of loot. Yet, despite the occasional piracy and political squabbles, the Etruscans managed to create a society that was both dynamic and sophisticated. Their impact on the Mediterranean world was profound, influencing the development of Roman culture in ways that are still evident today. From their art and architecture to their economic acumen, the Etruscans were a force to be reckoned with, a civilization that knew how to leave a lasting impression. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Etruscan life, it's clear that their legacy is more than just a footnote in history. They were pioneers, innovators, and cultural trendsetters who laid the foundations for what would become one of the most powerful empires in the ancient world. So, as we wrap up this chapter on Etruscan art, architecture, and economic prowess, let's raise a glass, preferably filled with a fine Chianti, to the original influencers of the ancient Mediterranean, those enigmatic Etruscans who knew how to throw a party, build a temple, and quite literally own the land beneath their feet. As we tip our hats to the Etruscans and their knack for leaving an indelible mark, it's time to unravel the political tapestry that these ancient maestros wove. After all, you can't throw a sprawling party without first deciding who's in charge of the guest list, right? Now, if you think the Etruscan political system was anything like the bureaucratic quagmire of your local DMV, think again. These folks were running a political scene that was as dynamic as it was influential, paving the way for future Roman shenanigans. Let's start with the basics, the Etruscan city-states. Picture a patchwork of independent yet interconnected urban centers, each with its own unique vibe and ruler, much like a collection of fiercely independent siblings who borrow each other's clothes. These city-states, think Tarquinia, Veii, and Clusium, were the beating hearts of Etruscan society, each governed by its own king, or lucumo. This wasn't your average monarch, mind you. The Lucumo was a head honcho with religious, military, and political authority, strutting around like a rock star at a sold-out concert. But here's the kicker. Despite their regal airs, Etruscan kings were more like the chairman of the board than absolute monarchs. They had to keep their aristocratic councils happy. Imagine trying to juggle a dozen egos while balancing a crown on your head. This council, known as the Senate, sound familiar, was comprised of noble families who wielded significant power and influence. If you're getting a whiff of Roman political structure, you're not wrong. The Romans took notes, people, copious ones. Now, while the Etruscans were no strangers to opulence, their political system wasn't about flashy displays of power. Instead, it was a delicate balance of diplomacy, negotiation, and a fair bit of backroom dealing. Take the city of Veii, which was ruled by a series of kings until it decided to mix things up with a republican form of government, complete with elected magistrates. This experiment in governance was like trying a new flavor of gelato, refreshing, but not without its complications. Veii's republican model was a precursor to the Roman Republic, which, let's be honest, got more press coverage than the Etruscans ever did. But let's not get too romantic about Etruscan politics. The truth is, their system was as volatile as a soap opera love triangle. Infighting among city-states was common, as each one jockeyed for power and prestige. Alliances were as fleeting as TikTok trends, and betrayals were par for the course. This constant state of flux made the Etruscan League a loose confederation of 12 city-states, more of a theoretical concept than a cohesive political entity. It was like herding cats, ambitious, power-hungry cats with a penchant for drama. Despite the chaos, the Etruscan political machine was a breeding ground for innovation. Their influence on Roman political institutions is undeniable, even if the Romans were too proud to send a thank you card. Take the Roman practice of the fasces, a bundle of rods symbolizing authority and unity. This nifty little symbol was lifted straight from Etruscan tradition, serving as a reminder that sometimes the best ideas are borrowed. And then there's the toga, that iconic Roman garment that conjures images of marble statues in Senate debates. While the Romans made it famous, it was the Etruscans who first draped themselves in this versatile garment. The toga wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a symbol of civic duty and social status, a sartorial reminder of who was calling the shots. So, next time you see a toga party invite, remember that you're channeling a bit of Etruscan chic. While the Etruscan political system was a mixed bag of innovation and intrigue, it also had its fair share of skeletons in the closet. Their penchant for piracy. For one, nothing says diplomatic relations like raiding a neighbor's ship. Their political landscape was as unpredictable as the Italian weather, with power struggles and coups keeping everyone on their toes. Yet, through it all, the Etruscans managed to leave an indelible mark on the Mediterranean world, one that would echo through the corridors of Roman power for centuries to come. As we continue our journey through the fascinating world of the Etruscans, it's clear that their legacy is as complex as it is enduring. From their vibrant city-states to their intricate political systems, the Etruscans were masters of reinvention, constantly adapting to the ever-changing tides of history. So, as we raise our glasses once more to these ancient trailblazers, let's remember that the past is never as simple as it seems. The Etruscans were not just the architects of their own destiny. They were the unsung heroes of a story that would shape the very foundation of Western civilization. And who knows, maybe they're still out there somewhere, throwing the ultimate after-party in the annals of time. Just when you think the Etruscans have played all their cards, they whip out their ace. Women. That's right. In a world where most ancient societies treated women like stage props, the Etruscans were busy writing a different script. Etruscan women weren't just sitting pretty. They were front and center, owning property, banqueting alongside the men, and generally living their best lives while their neighbors were still figuring out which fork to use. Let's dive into these banquets, shall we? Imagine a scene where the wine flows like water and the air is thick with the aroma of roasted game. At the heart of this revelry, you'll find Etruscan women, not demurely sipping their wine in the corner, but reclining right next to their male counterparts. Talk about breaking the mold. These soirees were less about gender roles and more about social status, a veritable who's who of Etruscan society. Women like Tanaquil, a queen in her own right, wielded influence not just behind the scenes, but right there in the open. If time travel were possible, she'd be the one hosting a TED talk on power dynamics. But here's the kicker. Etruscan women could actually own property. We're talking about a time when the idea of women owning land was as radical as putting a man on the moon. Inscriptions on tombs and artifacts reveal that women held titles to land and wealth, which they managed independently. This wasn't just a footnote. It was a seismic shift in how society viewed gender roles. In stark contrast, Roman women couldn't even sneeze without a male guardian's permission. The Etruscans were living proof that sometimes the past can be more progressive than the future. Of course, this level of female empowerment didn't just happen by accident. It was woven into the very fabric of Etruscan society. The importance of family lineage, particularly through the maternal line, gave women a significant role in the social hierarchy. This matrilineal emphasis was so ingrained that it even influenced how names were passed down. Etruscan children often took their mother's family name, a tradition that might raise eyebrows even today. Now, let's debunk a myth or two, starting with the Etruscan language. Often labeled as mysterious, it's not that it was written in invisible ink. It's just that deciphering it is a bit like trying to read a doctor's handwriting. The language used the Etruscan alphabet, which was a twist on the Greek one, but the words remain largely undeciphered, leaving scholars scratching their heads. Yet, this hasn't stopped the romantic notion of Etruscan as an enigmatic language from flourishing, much like the appeal of a cryptic crossword. Academic sleuths have managed to piece together enough to know it wasn't all secret codes and hidden messages. They used it for everything from religious texts to mundane lists, proving that even ancient cultures had grocery shopping to do. The real mystery isn't the script, but what it reveals about Etruscan culture, a civilization that was both deeply religious and socially complex. Their language, especially as seen in inscriptions, offers a glimpse into their world, where gods and goddesses played a central role. Temples were inscribed with dedications to deities, suggesting that religion was a public affair, not just a private one. This was a society that loved a good ritual, and they had a god or goddess for pretty much everything, from agriculture to the afterlife. Speaking of gods, the Etruscans had a rather unique way of communicating with the divine, reading the entrails of sacrificed animals. It's called haruspicy, and while it sounds like something from a Halloween special, it was serious business. Priests, or haruspices, would interpret the will of the gods by examining the liver of a sacrificial animal. This wasn't just a parlor trick. It required training and was considered a legitimate form of divination. The Romans found it so intriguing that they adopted the practice themselves. It seems that when it came to predicting the future, everyone was willing to get their hands dirty, literally. The Etruscan language and religious practices reveal a society that was both complex and deeply interconnected with their beliefs. Their rituals and inscriptions weren't just about appeasing the gods. They were about understanding their place in the cosmos. While much of their culture was absorbed by the Romans, this spiritual connection remained a defining feature of the Etruscan legacy. As we peel back the layers of Etruscan society, it's clear that their influence went beyond just art, architecture, and politics. They offered a blueprint for a more egalitarian world, where women could be seen and heard, and where one's name held weight regardless of gender. Their language, far from being an unsolvable enigma, was a key to understanding their values and beliefs, a testament to a civilization that was as sophisticated as it was enigmatic. In this exploration of Etruscan culture, we've seen how they set the stage for future generations. From their empowered women to their cryptic language, the Etruscans were trailblazers in an ancient world that often resisted change. While their language may remain mostly untranslated, their message is loud and clear. The Etruscans knew how to live, love, and leave a legacy that would echo through the ages. As we continue our journey, let's keep unraveling the threads of this remarkable civilization, knowing that every revelation brings us closer to understanding the true depth of their impact on history. While the Etruscan language may remain a cryptic crossword for linguists, its remnants hint at a civilization that was anything but a historical footnote. The Etruscans were like the unsung composers of a symphony, their notes woven into the grand opus of Roman civilization. Now, let's take a moment to marvel at how the Etruscans quietly orchestrated their legacy into the Roman juggernaut that followed. First up, let's talk infrastructure. The Romans are often credited as the original road warriors, paving the way for an empire that spanned 7 million square miles at its height. But who do you think passed them the blueprints? That's right, the Etruscans. They were the pioneers who laid the groundwork, literally. They built the first great road system in Italy, setting the stage for the Roman roads that would later stretch across Europe like a stone spiderweb. The Etruscans had a knack for creating efficient drainage systems and underground tunnels, crafting the urban backbone Rome would later claim as its own. It's like they handed Rome the keys to a brand new Ferrari and said, "Take it for a spin." And if you've ever marveled at Roman arches, the Etruscans want you to know they were the original architects of this iconic design. Arches were their thing, an engineering marvel that allowed them to build sturdy bridges and aqueducts. The Romans, ever the opportunists, saw the potential and ran with it, turning arches into their architectural calling card. So, the next time you walk under an archway, remember you're strolling through Etruscan ingenuity. But beyond bricks and mortar, the Etruscans also laid the spiritual and cultural foundations for Rome. The Roman pantheon of gods and goddesses, many of them are Etruscan imports, rebranded with Roman flair. Take Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods, who had his roots as Tinia, the Etruscan sky deity. Even the concept of the afterlife, with its elaborate rituals and tombs, was a cultural inheritance from the Etruscans. The Romans may have polished the concept, but the Etruscans provided the raw material. Now, let's debunk the myth that the Etruscans were nothing more than a prelude to the Roman epic. Their influence extended beyond mere architectural and religious blueprints. They were cultural tastemakers, shaping Roman society in more subtle ways. Consider the Roman obsession with public entertainment and grand spectacles, from chariot races to gladiatorial games. These weren't Roman inventions. They were Etruscan imports. The Etruscans had a flair for the dramatic, and their public games were a heady mix of entertainment and ritual. Think of them as the original producers of must-see TV. Despite their monumental contributions, the Etruscans didn't bask in the limelight. They were more like the ghostwriters of history, content to let the Romans take center stage while they operated behind the scenes. And while Rome may have absorbed Etruscan culture like a sponge, it was the Etruscans who set the tone and tenor for what would become the Roman Empire's cultural symphony. The Etruscans also left an indelible mark on Roman social structures. Their emphasis on family and social hierarchy seeped into Roman life, influencing everything from marriage customs to funeral rites. The Romans, with their penchant for order and discipline, embraced these traditions, albeit with their own militaristic twist. Yet, for all their borrowed glory, the Romans never quite matched the Etruscan flair for gender equality. Etruscan women, with their rights and social standing, were an anomaly in the ancient world, a progressive ideal that the Romans conveniently overlooked as they crafted their patriarchal society. Politically, the Etruscans were the quiet architects of Roman governance. The Roman Senate, it's an Etruscan legacy, borrowed and adapted to fit Rome's growing ambitions. The Etruscan system of city-states, each with its own ruling council, provided a model for Roman political organization. And let's not forget those fasces, the symbol of power and authority carried by Roman magistrates. It was an Etruscan invention, a reminder that even symbols of Roman might were built on Etruscan foundations. But here's the real kicker. The Etruscans' greatest legacy might just be their ability to fade into the background while their innovations took center stage. They were the invisible hand guiding Rome's ascent, their fingerprints on every aspect of Roman life. Yet, history often paints them as little more than a stepping stone, a civilization that was swallowed by the Roman tide. It's a romantic narrative, one that speaks to the allure of the underdog overshadowed by a mighty empire. But the reality is more nuanced, a testament to the Etruscans' enduring impact on the world stage. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Etruscan legacy, let's raise a metaphorical glass to these ancient trailblazers. Their innovations, from architecture to social customs, still echo through time, like ripples in the Tiber River. The Etruscans were the unsung heroes of history, their influence so deeply woven into the fabric of Roman civilization that it became indistinguishable from the tapestry itself. In the end, The Etruscans may not have been the stars of the show, but they were the indispensable crew, ensuring that the Roman performance was one for the ages. And who knows, perhaps somewhere in the echoes of history, the Etruscans are still out there, nodding in quiet satisfaction as we finally recognize the depth of their contributions. They were the original influencers of the ancient Mediterranean, the architects of their own legacy, and the true visionaries behind the Roman facade. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's remember that the past is never as simple as it seems, and that the Etruscans' silent symphony continues to play on, resonating through the ages. Your day begins not with the sound of an alarm clock, but with the gentle stirrings of dawn over Athens. The roosters are your morning playlist, and the air is tinged with the earthy aroma of clay, a smell you've come to associate with home and livelihood. You're a potter, and today, like every day, the Kerameikos district is your stage. This isn't just a neighborhood, it's the pulsating heart of pottery production in ancient Greece, where the hum of creativity mingles with the clatter of commerce. As you shake off sleep, you're reminded that pottery in ancient Athens isn't just about making attractive vases to sit pretty on a shelf. Nope, this is serious business. It's as essential to the economy as olive oil and wine. Your parts are the vessels that carry these goods across the Mediterranean. In fact, Athens exported over 100,000 amphorae annually. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of shipping containers. Without your craft, trade would grind to a halt faster than a chariot with a flat wheel. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, you need to tackle the morning routine. You dress in a simple chiton, a tunic that's as much a fashion statement as it is practical for the demands of your work. No fancy togas here. Those are for the philosophers and politicians, not for the folks who make sure the city runs smoothly. You grab a quick breakfast, perhaps some bread dipped in olive oil and a handful of olives. You're not just fueling your body, you're honoring the lifeblood of the Greek economy. Heading out, you navigate the bustling streets of Athens, where the chatter of merchants and the occasional bray of a donkey create a lively soundtrack. Your destination is the Kerameikos district, named after Keramos, the potter's patron god. It's a place that thrums with energy, a hive of artisans crafting everything from functional storage jars to elaborate kylixes adorned with scenes of epic battles and mythological tales. You might think that being a potter is all about artistic expression, but let's not romanticize things too much. Sure, creativity is part of the job, but so is back-breaking labor. Each piece you create involves a dance with the elements: earth, water, fire, and patience. The clay has to be dug, mixed, shaped, and fired. And that's before you even start thinking about the intricate designs that will tell stories of gods, heroes, and everyday life. As you cross the threshold into your workshop, the familiar sight of your tools greets you. The potter's wheel, rudimentary yet revolutionary, a gift from the gods themselves. It's been around since about 500 BCE, so you're part of a long tradition. The wheel's rotation is powered by your foot, a rhythmic motion that's almost meditative, syncing body and art in a timeless waltz. You might be wondering why Greeks were so enamored with pottery. After all, it's just a bunch of clay, right? Wrong. Pottery is to the ancient Greeks what smartphones are to us, absolutely indispensable. It's how they stored their grain, transported their wines, and even buried their dead. Those beautiful red figure vases were more than mere decoration. They were the Instagram of the ancient world, showcasing stories and status to anyone who cared to look. Now, let's talk economics. A single amphora could hold about 39 liters of liquid, roughly equivalent to 10 gallons. That's a lot of olive oil or wine ready to be shipped off to eager buyers across the seas. And the parts themselves, once adorned and fired, could fetch a good price in the market. The best pieces, like those from the workshop of Euphronios or Exekias, were highly sought after, both at home and abroad. But before you start daydreaming of wealth and fame, remember that most potters, including you, are more like the small business owners of today, working hard just to make ends meet. There's no safety net here, no pottery union to back you up. If your parts don't sell, it's a lean season for your family. You're as much an entrepreneur as you are an artist, balancing creativity with the harsh realities of supply and demand. As the morning sun climbs higher, casting long shadows within your workshop, you begin the day's work. The clay is moist and pliable beneath your hands, a satisfying texture that holds endless possibilities. Today, you're focusing on a batch of amphorae. These aren't just any parts. They're the backbone of trade and transport. Each one must be sturdy enough to withstand the rough seas and the jostling of long journeys. With each turn of the wheel, you're reminded of the lineage of potters before you, stretching back generations. It's a connection to the past that's as tangible as the clay under your fingers. And while the world around you might be filled with philosophers debating the nature of existence, your hands are busy creating something tangible, something real. The Kerameikos district buzzes with the activity of your fellow artisans. You share this space with painters, sculptors, and craftsmen of every stripe, each contributing to the vibrant tapestry of Athenian culture. There's a camaraderie here, a shared understanding of what it takes to transform raw materials into works of art and function. As you work, it's hard not to think about the stories your parts will tell. The Greeks loved to decorate their pottery with images from mythology and everyday life. A crater might depict the labors of Hercules or the exploits of Theseus. A kylix could show scenes of banquets or athletic contests. These aren't just pretty pictures. They're a form of storytelling, a way to communicate values, beliefs, and history. While you shape the clay, you reflect on the myths that have woven themselves into the fabric of Greek culture. The tales of gods and heroes are more than mere entertainment. They're a way of understanding the world, of making sense of life's mysteries. Yet they also serve a practical purpose, reinforcing social norms and values. The potter's wheel becomes a storyteller's stage, spinning tales of adventure and morality with every turn. Despite the romanticism that might surround your craft, let's not forget the realities. Pottery is a labor-intensive business. There's clay to be dug, water to be fetched, and wood to be gathered for the kilns. You work long hours, with little prospect of getting rich or famous. But there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that your work is integral to the functioning of Athenian society, that your parts are carrying the lifeblood of commerce and culture. As the sun continues its arc across the sky, you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow. It's a moment of reflection, a chance to appreciate the simple pleasures of life. A cool breeze, the laughter of children playing outside, the distant murmur of the city. These are the things that ground you, that remind you of why you do what you do. And while the world of ancient Athens is filled with its share of challenges and uncertainties, there's a certain stability in the rhythm of your daily routine, in the knowledge that your work, humble though it may be, is connected to something larger. The parts you create are more than just objects. They're vessels of history, carriers of tradition, and symbols of a culture that continues to captivate the imagination of generations. So, as you stand in your workshop, surrounded by the sights and sounds of the Kerameikos, you take a moment to savor the day, to appreciate the blend of art and industry that defines your life as a potter in ancient Athens. As you stand in your workshop, soaking in the mingled sense of clay and ambition, you know it's time to dive into the real grind. Literally, clay preparation might not sound like the stuff of epic poetry, but trust me, it's as essential to your craft as Achilles was to the Trojan War. To get started, you need to source your clay, a task that involves more than just scooping up some mud from the backyard. No, this is an operation that requires precision, a keen eye, and a willingness to get dirty. Your day begins at the clay pits on the outskirts of Athens, where the raw materials of your trade lie in wait. This isn't just any clay. It's Attic clay, renowned for its perfect balance of iron-rich minerals that give your pottery that iconic reddish hue once fired. It's like the high-end smartphone of clays. Everyone wants it, and not everyone can get it. But sourcing this premium mud isn't free. Oh no, you're looking at a cost of around 2 drachmas per load, which is quite a dent in your pocket, considering that a skilled worker might earn about 1 drachma for a day's labor. But hey, that's the price of doing business when your business is crafting the vessels that will carry the Greek economy. The clay pits are a hive of activity, a chaotic symphony of shovels clanging against rock and the grunts of laborers hauling heavy baskets. It's a scene more reminiscent of a construction site than a quaint artisan's workshop, but it's all part of the potter's life. Once you've secured your precious load, it's back to the workshop. The clay doesn't just leap onto the wheel ready to be shaped into art. It must be prepared. This means mixing it with water to get the perfect consistency. Spoiler alert, this isn't a job for the faint-hearted. You're mixing and kneading like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. The clay must be free of air bubbles and impurities, or your masterpiece could explode in the kiln, transforming your hard work into a pile of rubble. Talk about high stakes. Now, kneading clay might sound like baking bread, and in a way it is. But instead of feeding hungry bellies, you're feeding the hungry mouths of trade and culture. Each batch is a workout worthy of a Greek athlete, requiring strength, endurance, and a whole lot of patience. You're trying to achieve that perfect blend of pliability and firmness, and it's as much an art as it is a science. As you work, you can't help but reflect on the sheer physicality of your craft. It's easy to romanticize the image of a potter at his wheel, but the reality is a sweaty, gritty affair. You're not just shaping clay, you're wrestling with it, coaxing it into submission with every ounce of muscle you've got. And while the philosophers pontificate about the nature of being, you're here, elbow deep in the stuff of creation. The Greek world wasn't built on philosophy alone, after all. The practicalities of life depended on the labor of craftsmen like you. Your amphorae are the backbone of trade, the vessels that carry the bounty of Greek agriculture, olive oil, wine, grain, across the Mediterranean. It's a reminder that, despite the allure of myths and heroes, it's the everyday laborers who keep the wheels of society turning. As you pause to catch your breath, take a moment to appreciate the irony that the same clay you're covered in is also the foundation of Greek economic power. The humble part might lack the glamour of a gilded statue or a marble temple, but it's far more vital to the survival and prosperity of the city-state. Without your work, the great Athenian empire would crumble faster than a poorly mixed batch of clay. Once the clay is prepared, it's time for the next stage, wedging. This is the process of further removing air bubbles and ensuring a uniform texture. Think of it as a deep tissue massage for the clay, but instead of soothing aches and pains, you're preventing catastrophic kiln explosions. It's not exactly glamorous work, but it's crucial. You wedge the clay with methodical precision, transforming it from a raw lump into a pliable canvas ready for your creative touch. With the clay finally prepped, you might think the hard part is over. Not quite. Now comes the delicate dance of shaping and creating, where skill and artistry intertwine. But before you even reach for the wheel, you're reminded of the stakes. Each amphora you produce could make or break your financial season, and every mistake is a potential disaster. It's a high-wire act without a safety net, a blend of artistry and entrepreneurship that demands both vision and pragmatism. And let's not forget the economic realities. While the elite might commission elaborate pieces to show off at banquets, the bulk of your work is about meeting the demands of trade. Your parts need to be sturdy, functional, and affordable. The cost of production is always at the back of your mind, influencing every decision you make. As you settle into the rhythm of your work, shaping the clay under your hands, you're reminded of the timelessness of your craft. Potters have been doing this for generations, each one passing down their skills and knowledge like a sacred trust. And while the world around you might change, the essentials of pottery remain the same, a testament to the enduring nature of human creativity and ingenuity. In the end, you're more than just a potter. You're a vital cog in the machinery of Greek society. Your work might be physically demanding and financially precarious, but it's also deeply rewarding. You're part of something larger, a tradition that spans centuries and continents, connecting you to the past and the future in a way that few other professions can. So, as the day wears on and the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the Kerameikos district, you reflect on the journey from raw clay to finished part. It's a journey that's as much about the spirit as it is about the material, a reminder that the simplest things can hold the greatest significance. And while the myths of gods and heroes might captivate the imagination, it's the humble work of craftsmen like you that truly shape the world. As you stand there, clay dust settling into the creases of your chiton, the sun dips lower, casting a golden hue over the Kerameikos district. Time to dive into the real meat of your day, the potter's wheel. This ancient contraption, rudimentary yet revolutionary, awaits your touch. It's been around since roughly 500 BCE. Seriously, it's like the wheel is old enough to be Socrates' babysitter. Your foot sets it spinning, and you enter a trance-like state, a rhythmic tango between your hands and the malleable clay. Now, let's get one thing straight. Working the wheel isn't just some artsy-fartsy Zen activity. It's a technical skill passed down through generations, refined and respected. You're not just flinging mud around, You're orchestrating a clay symphony that speaks to centuries of tradition. And yes, it's a bit like trying to tame a wild horse. One wrong move, and your masterpiece collapses faster than a politician's promise. Here's the thing. Not all pottery is created equal. Sure, every piece you make is a small miracle of balance and form, but some are destined for greatness, or at least a higher price tag. Take amphorae, for example. These bad boys are the ancient Greek equivalent of shipping containers, but instead of cardboard and tape, they're elegantly sculpted and often adorned with intricate designs. A standard amphora could hold about 39 liters of liquid. Think of it as your ancient Costco bulk buy. But then there's the kylix, a shallow cup with a stem, used primarily for drinking wine at symposiums. Imagine a frat party, but with more philosophical debates and fewer solo cups. The kylix isn't just a drinking vessel, it's a conversation starter, a statement piece that says, appreciate the finer things in life, and also a good debate about the nature of existence. The real kicker, some of these pieces, especially those crafted by renowned artisans like Exekias or the enigmatic Berlin painter, could fetch a hefty sum. We're talking about prices that would make a modern art collector's heart skip a beat. Why? Well, it's not just about aesthetics, though who doesn't love a good Trojan War scene to liven up their dinner party? It's about status, prestige, and the stories they tell. These parts are the Instagram of the ancient world, broadcasting wealth and taste faster than you can say, #blessed. Now, before you get swept away dreaming of drachmas, remember, the economics of pottery is as fickle as the Athenian weather. Most potters aren't rolling in wealth. You're more likely to be a small business owner, hustling to make ends meet, than an ancient Jeff Bezos. The best pieces might end up in the hands of the elite, but the bulk of your work is functional, everyday pottery, the Tupperware of the ancient world. Let's talk skill. Shaping clay on the wheel requires a deft touch, an intuitive understanding of balance and symmetry. You're not just creating objects, you're crafting stories, each curve and line a testament to your skill and vision. And while the philosophers in the Agora might debate the virtues of knowledge, you're here, hand deep in clay, making tangible contributions to society's coffers. The process is as much about feeling as it is about technique. You need to sense the clay's mood, its willingness to be shaped. Too much pressure, and you've got a lopsided mess on your hands. Too little, and you're left with a sad, floppy excuse for an amphora. It's a dance of balance and patience, a testament to the enduring nature of craftsmanship. And here's where we bust a myth. Potters aren't solitary artists toiling away in isolation. The Kerameikos district is a buzzing hive of activity, a melting pot of creativity where ideas are exchanged as freely as drachmas. You're part of a community, a network of artisans who support and inspire each other. It's a reminder that while the work might be solitary, the journey is collective. Of course, there's the economic reality that underpins everything. You're not just an artist. You're an entrepreneur, balancing the books while balancing your parts. Every amphora is a calculated risk. Will it sell, or will it gather dust in the corner of the workshop? The market is as unpredictable as a Greek tragedy, with fortunes rising and falling like the tides. The wheel spins, and with it, the stories of ancient Greece unfold. Each piece you make is a chapter in a larger narrative, a snapshot of a culture that values both beauty and function. The amphorae and kylixes are more than just objects. They're cultural ambassadors, bridging the gap between the past and the present. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the workshop, you pause to admire your handiwork. The parts stand in neat rows, ready to face the fiery trial of the kiln. It's a moment of satisfaction, a testament to the skill and dedication that defines your craft. And while the world of ancient Athens might be filled with philosophers and warriors, it's the humble potter who holds the true power, the power to shape, create, and endure. So, as you wipe the clay from your hands and prepare to close up shop, take a moment to appreciate the legacy you're part of. The parts you make today are more than just vessels. They're bridges across time, connecting you to the past and future in ways that only art and craft can. And as long as there's clay to be shaped and stories to be told, the potter's wheel will keep on spinning, weaving the tapestry of history one turn at a time. As the shadows lengthen and the golden glow of the sun dims, you trade the potter's wheel for the kiln room, a place where ambition meets its fiery test. Welcome to the ancient equivalent of a high-stakes pressure cooker. This is where the magic happens, or where everything goes up in smoke. Literally. The kiln is the heart of pottery, an inferno where your carefully crafted amphorae and kylixes face their trial by fire. Kiln technology in ancient Greece was, let's say, rudimentary by modern standards, but it was nothing short of ingenious for its time. Imagine a beehive structure made of brick or stone, designed to reach temperatures upward of 900 degrees Celsius. That's over 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who'd rather not convert. It's like baking bread, if your bread could explode like a small clay grenade. The Greeks had a 3-stage firing process that could make or break your day. The first phase was the oxidizing phase, where the kiln was heated to about 800 degrees Celsius, turning the clay a red-orange color. Next came the reducing phase, where the kiln's vents were closed to lower the oxygen levels, causing the pottery to turn black. Finally, the reoxidizing phase involved reopening the vents, allowing oxygen back in to fix the colors permanently. And here's where the drama comes in. You see, ancient potters didn't have a handy-dandy thermometer to check the temperature. Nope, they had to rely on experience, intuition, and a fair bit of luck. It's like trying to cook a steak to medium rare without a meat thermometer, only instead of ruining dinner, you risk shattering weeks of work. If the temperature spikes or drops too quickly, your clay creations might end up as rubble. Just one misstep during this precarious dance with fire, and your day could end in a chorus of shattered dreams and broken parts. Now, let's talk about what really matters: economics. Firing pottery is a costly affair. You need wood, lots of it, to feed the kiln's insatiable appetite for heat. And wood isn't free. You're shelling out drachmas for each load, which could be the difference between a profitable week and eating lentils for dinner again. In fact, the cost of wood could rival the price of the clay itself. It's a significant investment, with no guarantee of return. So, as you stack your parts inside, you're not just placing clay into a kiln, you're placing bets with fate. While the kiln is heating up, let's dispel a myth. There's a romantic notion that ancient potters were solitary geniuses, crafting masterpieces in isolation. The reality, it's more like a team sport. You're part of a community, sharing techniques, resources, and sometimes even kilns. The Kerameikos district thrived on collaboration. The success of one potter often depended on the networks and reputations of many. It's like a neighborhood potluck, where everyone contributes their best dish. Except here, your dish might crack and ruin the whole feast. As the kiln reaches its peak temperature, you're reminded of the precarious balance between art and science. It's a trial and error process, with each firing offering a chance to learn and adapt. The ancients didn't have the luxury of modern chemistry, so every outcome was a lesson etched in clay. Some pieces would emerge flawless, worthy of the gods themselves, while others would end up as landfill fodder. It's a humbling reminder that mastery is an endless pursuit, and every potter's journey is as unpredictable as the flames they wield. So why did they put themselves through this fiery ordeal? Because pottery wasn't just utilitarian, it was a canvas for storytelling. Successful pieces weren't just sold, they were celebrated. A well-crafted kylix or amphora could transcend its function, becoming a symbol of cultural identity and artistic achievement. And let's be honest, who doesn't want to leave a legacy that might one day grace the shelves of the world's museums? Yet, it's important to remember that the allure of artistry often masked the harsh realities. Potters were craftsmen, yes, but they were also entrepreneurs navigating a volatile market. Their success depended not only on skill and creativity, but also on their ability to adapt to the ever-changing demands of trade. The kiln room was their crucible, a place where raw talent was tested and refined, where the heat of competition could forge greatness, or reduce it to ashes. As you tend to the kiln, keeping a vigilant eye on the smoke and flames, you're participating in a tradition that spans millennia. The kiln is more than a tool, it's a portal to the past, a link in the unbroken chain of human ingenuity and perseverance. And as the fire roars, you can't help but feel a connection to the generations of potters who came before you, each one contributing to the rich tapestry of history with every piece they fired. The night deepens, and the kiln's heat casts flickering shadows across the workshop. It's a dance of light and dark, a vivid reminder of the risks and rewards that define your craft. As the flames begin to die down, you carefully unload your parts, each one a testament to the delicate balance between art and alchemy. Some emerge as triumphs, their surfaces gleaming with the rich hues of success. Others bear the scars of the kiln's wrath, each crack a reminder of the unpredictable nature of your trade. But even in failure, there's value. The broken shards are not wasted. They're ground down and mixed into future batches of clay, recycled in a continuous cycle of creation and renewal. It's a reminder that in the world of pottery, as in life, nothing is truly lost. Everything has the potential to be reborn. As you lay your pieces out to cool, the air is tinged with the scent of success and soot. The kiln room is silent now, its fiery heart at rest, until the next load demands its attention. You take a moment to reflect on the day's events, the challenges faced, and the lessons learned. The kiln has tested your mettle, and you've emerged with a deeper understanding of your craft and a renewed appreciation for the ancient art of pottery. The night draws to a close, and as you leave the workshop, you carry with you the knowledge that the kiln will always be there, waiting to challenge and inspire you. It's a constant in a world of change, a symbol of the enduring power of human creativity and resilience. And as you step into the cool night air, you know that tomorrow will bring new opportunities and new challenges, but the spirit of the potter will remain unchanged, a testament to the timeless dance between fire and clay. As you step into the cool night air, you know tomorrow's challenges await, but tonight the Agora is calling. Even as darkness settles over Athens, the Agora doesn't sleep. It's the city's bustling marketplace and the beating heart of its economic engine. Here, under the fading glow of twilight, the real hustle begins. You might think your work is done, but think again. In ancient Greece, the term work-life balance was as foreign as a smartphone at the Parthenon. The Agora is more than just a marketplace. It's a social hub, the ancient world's answer to both Wall Street and Facebook. Picture this: rows of stalls under the open sky, each one brimming with goods ranging from fresh produce to finely crafted pottery, your pottery. The air is alive with the sound of traders haggling, the clink of coins, and the hum of countless conversations. This isn't just commerce, it's community theater, where every potter, merchant, and customer plays a role in the grand economic drama. So, let's talk business. Forget the romantic notion of the solitary artist toiling away in obscurity. Potters in ancient Athens were entrepreneurs, and the Agora was their stage. Your amphorae and kylixes aren't just functional, they're commodities with the potential for serious profit. Bartering here is a skill akin to modern-day stock trading. You're not just selling a part, you're selling a story, a piece of cultural identity that holds as much value as the goods it might one day contain. Agora operates on more than just drachmas, though you'll need plenty of those too. It's a place where barter reigns supreme. Say you have a particularly fine kylix, the kind that would make even Dionysus raise an eyebrow. You might trade it for a bushel of barley or perhaps a new pair of sandals. The key is knowing the value of your goods and the art of negotiation. You're not just a potter, you're a diplomat, navigating a web of social and economic exchanges. Now, here's where we bust one of those persistent myths, the starving artist. Sure, not every potter lived like an Athenian celebrity, but many were far from the impoverished artisans of popular imagination. Take Euphronios, a master potter whose works were so prized that they fetched prices equivalent to a modern luxury car. These artisans were the influencers of their day, their names known across the Mediterranean, their parts gracing the tables of the elite. It turns out that in ancient Greece, good pottery could buy you more than just a meal. It could buy you a legacy. But let's not get carried away. For every Euphronios, there were countless others who scraped by, their names lost to history, their parts sold for a pittance. The truth is, the pottery business was as volatile as the stock market, with fortunes that could rise and fall faster than you could say Achilles' heel. It was a life of perpetual uncertainty. A today's triumph could easily become tomorrow's tragedy. Yet, in this uncertainty lies a certain gritty romance. The potter's life was one of resilience and adaptability, qualities that have ensured the survival of their craft across centuries. The Agora was a crucible where reputation was as valuable as skill, a place where you could make or break your career with a single transaction. It was a world where the line between success and obscurity was as thin as the clay you worked with. So, what about social status? In a society that revered its philosophers and warriors, where did a potter stand? Somewhere between the bottom rung and a respectable middle ground. While you wouldn't find potters rubbing elbows with the likes of Socrates, they weren't exactly outcasts either. Skilled artisans were respected for their craft, and a successful potter could enjoy a comfortable life, perhaps even a modest degree of fame. It was a delicate balance, navigating the social strata of a city that prized intellect and valor above all else. And yet, here's the irony. While the philosophers debated the nature of existence, potters were shaping its very foundation. They crafted the vessels that carried the lifeblood of commerce, the amphorae that transported olive oil and wine across the seas, fueling the economy and sustaining the city-state's power. In many ways, potters were the unsung heroes of Athens, their work forming an unspoken backbone of the city's prosperity. As the night deepens and the agora begins to quiet, you reflect on the day's events and the broader tapestry of life as an ancient Greek potter. It's a story of art and industry, of creativity and commerce, of survival and success. It's a reminder that while the myths of gods and heroes might capture the imagination, it's the humble work of craftsmen that truly shapes the world. And as you make your way home under the starlit sky, you carry with you the knowledge that your work is more than just clay and fire. It's a legacy, a testament to the enduring power of craft and creativity. The parts you create today are more than just objects. They are vessels of history, carriers of tradition, and symbols of a culture that continues to captivate the imagination of generations. So, as you lay down to rest, let the stories of the day settle like the dust of the kiln. Tomorrow, the wheel will spin again, the clay will be shaped anew, and the agora will buzz with life once more. It's a cycle as old as time, a dance between art and commerce that has sustained civilizations for millennia. And as long as there are stories to tell and parts to shape, the legacy of the potter will endure, a timeless testament to the creative spirit of humanity. Hannibal Barca, the man with a name that sounds like a Bond villain, but lived a few thousand years too early to get his own theme song, was not your average Carthaginian kid. Born in 247 BC, he entered a world where Rome was the annoying neighbor blasting loud music at all hours, and Carthage was the grumpy resident plotting revenge. And who was orchestrating this symphony of ancient grudges? None other than his father, Hamilcar Barca, a general who had more beef with Rome than a steakhouse on a Saturday night. Hamilcar was a staunch believer that the best kind of bedtime story was a tale of Carthaginian valor and Roman failures. One can only imagine little Hannibal tucked in at night, listening intently as his father narrated the not-so-glorious outcomes of the First Punic War, where Rome finally managed to defeat Carthage after 23 years of back-and-forth battles. This was more than just a bedtime routine. It was indoctrination with a side of family legacy. The legend has it that when Hannibal was just 9 years old, his father made him swear an oath of eternal hostility toward Rome. Picture this, a solemn ceremony, little Hannibal standing there, eyes wide with the kind of determination you usually only see in kids who are told they must finish their veggies before dessert. This oath was less about eating peas and more about a lifelong commitment to making life difficult for the Romans. I swear that so soon as age will permit, I will use fire and steel to arrest the destiny of Rome, is how some sources recount it. That's a heavy promise for a kid who probably didn't even know what destiny meant yet. Now, let's pause here to debunk the myth of the sweet, innocent child who just happened to grow into a military genius. Hannibal was not merely a pawn in his father's game. He was a willing participant in a family drama that rivaled any soap opera. Raised on tales of Roman treachery, Hannibal's formative years were a cocktail of military strategy and familial devotion. It's like growing up in a household where Monopoly games are banned because Dad still holds a grudge from that one time Uncle Larry bankrupted him with a hotel on Boardwalk. The Barca family wasn't just any family. They were Carthage's unofficial royal family, with a penchant for power moves that would make a chess master blush. Hamilcar, the patriarch, wasn't just raising a son. He was grooming a successor, a future commander who would finish what he started. Hamilcar himself was quite the character. Imagine a man with the charisma of a cult leader and the tactical mind of a seasoned general. He was the epitome of the term larger than life, and his children were expected to follow in his rather formidable footsteps. Hamilcar's influence on Hannibal went beyond bedtime oaths and war stories. The elder Barca was a master of guerrilla tactics, a kind of ancient-day James Bond who preferred the rough and tumble of asymmetrical warfare to the formal dance of traditional battles. He made sure his son understood the importance of cunning over brute force, which would later become Hannibal's signature style. Forget the direct approach. Why not just sneak around the Alps with a few dozen elephants? But we'll save that legendary escapade for later. In his early years, Hannibal was also introduced to the economic and political realities of Carthage, a city-state that was as much about business as it was about battle. Carthage was essentially the Amazon of the ancient world, minus the 2-day shipping. It was a bustling hub of trade, commerce, and occasionally military might. The city thrived on its ports and its ability to control the Mediterranean's lucrative trade routes. This economic backdrop was crucial for understanding why Carthage and Rome were constantly at each other's throats. It wasn't just about ideology. It was about who controlled the money, honey. Hannibal's education wasn't limited to military doctrine. He was also schooled in the art of diplomacy and negotiation, skills that would serve him well in his later years when he needed to rally diverse troops under a single banner. Carthage was a melting pot of cultures and languages, and young Hannibal learned to navigate this multicultural landscape with the finesse of a seasoned politician. It was like a crash course in international relations, minus the PowerPoint presentations. Hannibal's upbringing was a perfect storm of ambition, resentment, and opportunity. He was being primed for greatness, or at least for a lifetime of making Roman senators lose sleep. The young Barca grew up in a world where every Carthaginian victory was celebrated as a personal triumph, and every Roman success was a call to arms. It was a world of clear divisions and high stakes, and Hannibal was ready to play the game. As Hannibal reached his teenage years, the stakes grew higher. His father, Hamilcar, took him to the Iberian Peninsula, where Carthage was busy expanding its influence. This was Hannibal's first taste of real military experience, a kind of ancient internship where the perks included a first-hand look at warfare and the occasional siege. Here, Hannibal learned the value of adaptability and the importance of leveraging local resources, both lessons that would prove invaluable in his future campaigns against Rome. The Iberian venture was more than just a military exercise. It was a strategic move by Hamilcar to secure valuable mineral wealth, particularly silver, which was the lifeblood of Carthage's economy. Controlling these resources meant Carthage could bankroll its military endeavors, ensure the loyalty of its mercenaries, and keep the Roman threat at bay. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy, and young Hannibal was right there in the thick of it, soaking up every lesson like a sponge. Through all this, Hannibal retained his youthful zeal and a burgeoning sense of identity that was deeply rooted in Carthaginian pride. He was a young man with a mission, a product of his environment and his formidable family. His early years were a blend of education, experience, and expectation, all of which would coalesce into the formidable leader history remembers. So, there he was, Hannibal Barca, a young man on the cusp of greatness and mischief, ready to take on the world, or at least Rome. His story was just beginning, but already the pieces were in place for a drama that would span continents and decades, creating a legend that would echo through the ages. With a father like Hamilcar and a childhood steeped in tales of vengeance and strategy, Hannibal was set on a path that would lead him to the heights of military genius and the depths of historical infamy. Who knew that a childhood oath could set the stage for such epic adventures? Well, Hannibal knew, and he was just getting started. And so, with a childhood oath still echoing in his ears like an over-ambitious New Year's resolution, Hannibal Barca was ready for his next grand act, which was less of a military maneuver and more of a madcap adventure over the Alps. Picture this. It's 218 BC. Hannibal has decided that the best way to surprise the Romans is to take the scenic route through some of the most inhospitable terrain known to man. Forget the straightforward approach. Why not take a leisurely stroll through a mountain range with an army and a few dozen elephants in tow? It's the kind of decision that makes you question whether Hannibal was a military genius or just had a really lousy travel agent. Let's set the stage. Hannibal's forces numbered around 50, 000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. Yes, you heard that right, elephants. Because when you're planning an epic journey through the mountains, why not bring along animals that are distinctly not mountain creatures? You can almost hear the collective groan of his logistics team. But sir, they might have protested. Elephants aren't exactly known for their alpine skills. Yet. Hannibal was undeterred, his eyes set firmly on Rome like a kid with a crush set on impressing the most popular girl in school. Now, let's bust some myths. The romanticized accounts often paint this crossing as a seamless journey led by a charismatic leader, but reality was more akin to a road trip gone horrifically wrong. The mountains weren't just tall, they were treacherous, with narrow passes, sheer cliffs, and weather conditions that would make even the hardiest of adventurers think twice. Snow, ice, and avalanches weren't just inconveniences, they were downright deadly. We're talking about losses that would make any commander weep into their ancient spreadsheets. By the time Hannibal emerged on the other side, his force had been nearly halved, with only about 26,000 infantry and a handful of elephants still standing, if you can call it that. The logistical nightmare was staggering. Feeding an army of that size, let alone a herd of elephants, was a Herculean task. Supplies ran low, morale hit rock bottom, and the soldiers who weren't lost to the mountains were probably wishing they had just stayed home. The elephants, those poor creatures, were likely wondering what crime they had committed in a past life to deserve this particular punishment. This wasn't a strategic masterstroke. It was a desperate gamble with lives on the line. Yet, despite the chaos, there was method in Hannibal's madness. His passage through the Alps was as much a psychological tactic as it was a physical maneuver. The element of surprise was his greatest ally. While the Romans were busy reinforcing their coastal defenses, expecting a traditional seaborne assault, Hannibal was busy redefining what it meant to think outside the box. His sudden appearance in northern Italy was the stuff of nightmares for Roman generals who hadn't considered that anyone would be audacious or insane enough to attempt such a feat. The economic backdrop to this adventure is equally intriguing. Carthage, with its economy heavily reliant on trade and mercenaries, couldn't afford a lengthy war of attrition. They needed decisive victories, fast. Hannibal's move wasn't just about military brilliance. It was also a cold, calculated economic decision. He needed to strike at the heart of Rome quickly and decisively before Carthage's coffers ran dry. Now, let's not get too carried away with the romance of the story. Yes, Hannibal's crossing of the Alps is legendary, but it's essential to remember the human cost. The staggering losses, the harsh conditions, and the sheer desperation of the undertaking highlight the reality of ancient warfare. It's a stark reminder that history often glosses over the grittier details in favor of a more palatable narrative. But make no mistake, this was no walk in the park. It was a brutal, unforgiving journey that tested every ounce of resolve in Hannibal's army. And what of those elephants that have become synonymous with Hannibal's legend? They weren't just for show. In battle, they were the ancient equivalent of tanks, capable of breaking enemy lines and causing chaos. But in the mountains, they were more burden than boon, a testament to Hannibal's stubbornness and his willingness to take risks that bordered on the reckless. Still, it's hard not to admire the audacity of it all. In a world where most commanders played it safe, Hannibal was the rogue who rolled the dice and laughed in the face of conventional wisdom. As Hannibal and his diminished forces emerged from the Alps, battered but unbowed, they faced a new challenge. The Roman army, now very much aware of the threat at their doorstep. But for Hannibal, the hard part was over. He had crossed the Alps, a feat that would echo through history and cement his reputation as one of antiquity's greatest commanders. The adventure was just beginning, and Rome was about to learn that Hannibal Barca wasn't just a name to be whispered in fear. He was a force of nature that would challenge the very foundations of the Republic. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic confrontations, and Hannibal was ready to play his part with all the flair of a seasoned actor. As Hannibal eyed the Roman legions with the kind of determination you'd expect from a man who just conquered the Alps with a dwindling army and a handful of elephants, he knew it was time to put his strategic genius to the test on Italian soil. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about redefining warfare itself. And believe me, Hannibal was about to give the Romans a masterclass in tactical innovation that would leave them scratching their helmets in confusion. First up, the Battle of Trebia in late 218 BC. Hannibal was like a chess grandmaster who could see 10 moves ahead, while the Roman generals were still trying to figure out whether they were playing chess or checkers. With around 40,000 men at his disposal, he faced a Roman army of nearly equal size. But numbers weren't everything. It was how you used them that counted. Hannibal's plan was as audacious as it was cunning. He lured the Romans into crossing the freezing Trebia River, a move that was about as sensible as trying to ice skate in sandals. Picture the scene. Roman soldiers, wet and shivering, stumbling onto the battlefield with all the enthusiasm of a kid being dragged to the dentist. Meanwhile, Hannibal's troops, snug and warm, were ready to pounce. When the battle commenced, it was less a clash of titans and more a tactical ambush waiting to happen. The real stroke of genius came with Hannibal's hidden force. He had stationed a detachment of 2,000 elite troops in ambush, led by his brother Mago. As the Romans engaged, thinking they were in for a straightforward fight, Mago's forces emerged from their hiding place and hit the Roman rear like a thunderbolt. Chaos ensued. Roman formations crumbled under the pincer attack, and soon the battlefield was a testament to Hannibal's brilliance. The Romans suffered around 20,000 casualties, a staggering loss that sent shockwaves through the Republic. Hannibal had struck a blow that was both strategic and psychological, shaking the Roman confidence to its core. Next, we moved to 217 BC, the Battle of Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal once again proved that he wasn't just playing a game. He was writing the rules as he went along. Here, he used the terrain to his advantage like an artist, choosing the perfect canvas. He lured the Roman consul Gaius Flaminius and his 30,000 troops into a trap so perfectly set that even Wile E. Coyote would have taken notes. Hannibal's army, hidden in the hills surrounding the narrow pass by the lake, was ready to spring like the most disciplined jack-in-the-box in history. As the Romans marched along the lake's edge, Hannibal unleashed his forces with the precision of a Swiss watch. The ambush was swift and brutal. The Romans were caught completely off guard, sandwiched between the hills and the lake with nowhere to run. Flaminius himself fell in the melee, and by the end of the day, nearly 15,000 Romans lay dead, with thousands more captured. Hannibal had orchestrated one of the most complete tactical victories in military history without even engaging in a traditional pitched battle. It was a masterstroke of deception and maneuver, leaving Rome reeling and Flaminius's political career as dead as his military one. And then came Cannae in 216 BC, a battle so legendary it's become shorthand for tactical genius. If Hannibal's previous victories were impressive, this was his magnum opus, a symphony of destruction conducted with deadly precision. Facing a Roman force of around 86,000 men, Hannibal had about 50,000 troops, many of whom were weary from months of campaigning. But Hannibal wasn't fazed by the odds. He was about to pull off a maneuver so audacious would be studied by military strategists for millennia to come. As the two armies faced off on the dusty plains of Cannae, the Romans were confident in their numerical superiority. They formed up in a massive block, thinking they could simply steamroll the Carthaginians. But Hannibal had other plans. He arranged his troops in a crescent formation, with his weaker center deliberately positioned to give ground. As the Romans pressed forward, smelling blood, the Carthaginian flanks held firm and began to envelop them in a classic double envelopment maneuver, or, as the Romans might describe it, a tactical nightmare. This was 3D chess on an epic scale. As the Roman legions pushed into the Carthaginian center, they found themselves increasingly surrounded. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. Hannibal's cavalry, commanded by his brilliant subordinate Hannibal, had already routed the Roman horse and was now attacking the Roman rear. Trapped on all sides, the Roman army disintegrated in a storm of confusion and fear. Estimates suggest that the Romans suffered losses as high as 70,000 men, a staggering figure that makes Cannae one of the bloodiest days in military history. Hannibal had not just defeated the Roman army, he had obliterated it, turning conventional tactics on their head and leaving Rome in a state of shock and awe. These battles weren't just about military tactics. They were a testament to Hannibal's understanding of the psychological and economic dimensions of war. He knew that to defeat Rome, he had to do more than win battles. He had to break their will, bleed them dry, and make them question their very dominance. For Carthage, a city that thrived on trade and commerce, a prolonged war was unsustainable. Hannibal needed quick, decisive victories, and his ability to deliver them was nothing short of remarkable. Yet, despite these triumphs, the war was far from over. Rome, that stubborn old mule of a republic, refused to buckle. They adopted the Fabian strategy, named after the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus, who decided that avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal was the best course of action. This war of attrition was a slow and grinding affair, a stark contrast to the lightning campaigns Hannibal favored. And while it might not have been as glamorous as a pitched battle, it was effective in wearing down Hannibal's resources and manpower. Hannibal's genius lay not just in his ability to win battles, but in how he adapted to the changing circumstances of war. He was a master of improvisation, capable of turning even the bleakest situations into opportunities. But as the war dragged on, the limitations of Carthage's resources became painfully apparent. Unlike Rome, Carthage lacked the deep reserves of manpower and materials needed for a long conflict. Hannibal was fighting not just the Roman legions, but the economic and political realities of his own city-state. So, while Hannibal's victories at Trebia, Lake Trace and Cannae were dazzling displays of military prowess, they also highlighted the broader challenges he faced. He was a commander of unparalleled skill, but even he couldn't overcome the structural disadvantages that Carthage faced against Rome's inexhaustible resources and unwavering resolve. The stage was set for a conflict that would test not just Hannibal's tactical genius, but his ability to navigate the harsh realities of ancient warfare. In the end, Hannibal's story is one of audacity, brilliance, and the relentless pursuit of an impossible dream. It's a tale that continues to captivate and intrigue, reminding us that even the greatest of victories can be but fleeting moments in the grand sweep of history. As Rome regrouped and plotted its next moves, Hannibal remained a force to be reckoned with, a specter haunting their every decision. But the war was far from over, and the path to victory, or defeat, was still fraught with peril and uncertainty. The legend of Hannibal Barca was still being written, one battle at a time. While Hannibal was out there redefining audacity on the battlefield, the real challenges were lurking in the political and economic shadows, as they often do. You see, Carthage and Rome weren't just two kids fighting over who got to rule the ancient sandbox. No, their rivalry was more like a bitter custody battle over the Mediterranean's lucrative trade routes, with both parties willing to throw some serious shade and troops at each other. And here's where our hero, Hannibal, faced his most daunting adversary, logistics. Hannibal was a tactical genius, no doubt about it, but the man wasn't exactly a whiz with supply chains. It's like he could plan the most epic surprise party, but forgot to book the caterers. The Carthaginian military machine was a lean, mean fighting force, but it was also a precarious house of cards. Unlike Rome, which could draw on a practically limitless supply of manpower and resources, Carthage had to play the game a bit more like a gambler on a losing streak, constantly looking for that big win to turn things around. Carthage's economy was heavily reliant on trade, not farming, which is a bit like being a tech startup in a world dominated by agricultural giants. This meant that while Carthage could bankroll its army with the riches of commerce, it didn't have the same deep reserves of manpower that Rome could tap into. Hannibal's army was a multicultural ensemble of mercenaries, drawn from across the Mediterranean. This was less a cohesive unit and more a ragtag band of mercs, united by a shared interest in paychecks and plunder. Think of it as the ancient world's answer to a rock band, with major lineup changes every tour. And here lies the rub. Hannibal had to constantly win battles to maintain momentum and morale. His troops needed victories, not only for the spoils, but also as reassurance that their leader wasn't just another megalomaniac with a death wish. Unlike Rome, which could afford to play the long game, Hannibal was on a ticking clock, racing against dwindling supplies and the loyalty of his diverse forces. His strategy was like a high-stakes poker game, where every hand had to count and folding wasn't an option. Then there was the matter of allies, or rather, the conspicuous lack of them. While Rome had the benefit of a well-established network of alliances across Italy, ready to rally to their cause, Hannibal was left trying to convince the locals that siding with him was the smart move. Imagine trying to win over a crowd when you're not just the underdog, but also the guy who just marched through their backyard with a bunch of elephants. Hannibal needed a charm offensive, but what he got was more like a charm defensive. The Italian states, understandably wary of the Carthaginian commander, didn't exactly throw open their gates in welcome. They were like fair-weather friends, always eager to see how the winds were blowing before committing to any party. The politics back in Carthage didn't do Hannibal any favors, either. The Carthaginian government, a complex mix of oligarchs and merchants more concerned with protecting their bottom line than fueling a sustained war effort, was reluctant to fully commit to Hannibal's audacious campaign. They were the kind of friends who tell you to go for it, but wouldn't lend you a dime when you asked. This ambivalence meant Hannibal was often left hanging, waiting for reinforcements or financial support that were as elusive as a Roman truce. In desperate need of allies, Hannibal turned his attention to the one power that might tip the scales in his favor, Macedonia. The Macedonian king, Philip V, was no friend of Rome, and Hannibal hoped to forge an alliance that would keep Roman forces divided. Here, though, the complexities of ancient diplomacy reared their ugly heads. Communications were slow, no messenger pigeons with Wi-Fi back then, and by the time any agreements were reached, the military situation on the ground had often changed. It's the historical equivalent of sending a text and getting a reply 3 years later. Philip V did eventually declare war on Rome, but the Macedonian front turned out to be more of a distraction than a decisive blow, and Hannibal was left holding the bag. Now, if Hannibal had been around today, he might have benefited from a solid PR team or at least a LinkedIn profile that would let him network with potential allies more effectively. Instead, he had to rely on the slow gears of negotiation and the whims of political leaders who were more interested in their domestic squabbles than in the grand strategy of taking down Rome. It was like trying to organize a flash mob with smoke signals. Impressive if you could pull it off, but mostly just a lot of smoke. Hannibal's inability to capitalize fully on his victories wasn't for lack of trying, but rather a testament to the immense logistical and political challenges he faced. He was like an artist painting a masterpiece with a brush that kept losing bristles. His genius on the battlefield was unmatched, but off it, the tangled web of ancient politics and economics proved a far more insidious foe. The Romans, for all their faults, were masters of bureaucracy and logistics, able to muster new legions even after catastrophic losses. For Hannibal, each victory was a step forward in a marathon where his shoes were constantly wearing thin. Despite all these challenges, Hannibal remained a force to be reckoned with, a shadow over the Roman psyche that refused to fade. His story wasn't just one of battles won or lost. It was a saga of relentless ambition meeting the harsh realities of an unforgiving world. As the war dragged on, the legend of Hannibal grew, but so did the obstacles he faced. The game was far from over, and both Rome and Carthage were locked in a struggle that would test their resolve and redefine the very nature of power in the ancient world. And so, the Second Punic War continued, with Hannibal still a specter on the Italian peninsula, a reminder that even the greatest military minds can be undone by the mundane details of supply lines and alliances. But his story, like any great epic, was far from over. The stage was set for further drama, and as the pieces moved across the ancient chessboard, one couldn't help but wonder what the next act would bring. The legend of Hannibal Barca was still unfolding, a testament to the enduring allure of ambition, audacity, and the eternal quest for glory in a world where the stakes were as high as the peaks of the Alps he had so famously crossed. As the Second Punic War dragged on like a never-ending soap opera, with the stakes ramped up to existential levels, Hannibal faced the harsh truth that even the boldest strategies have an expiration date. Sure, he had given Rome a run for its money, quite literally, but the tides of war were shifting, and not in his favor. You see, Rome was like that annoying friend who just refuses to throw in the towel. They kept bouncing back with fresh troops and unyielding resolve, a stark contrast to Carthage's dwindling resources and political infighting. The Romans, under the leadership of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, because, well, conquering things was apparently a great way to earn a nickname, decided that playing defense wasn't their style. In 204 BC, Scipio took the fight to Africa, aiming right at Carthage's doorstep. Hannibal, still holding the fort in Italy, had to make the toughest decision of his career: abandon the Italian campaign or risk losing his homeland. It was like choosing between two horrible flavors of ancient ice cream. Both options were unpalatable. Reluctantly, Hannibal returned to Africa in 203 BC to face Scipio at the Battle of Zama. This showdown was the grand finale everyone had been waiting for, and it was just as dramatic as a reality TV climax. Hannibal fielded around 50,000 troops, including his infamous elephants, which by now were less of a surprise and more of a "oh, not these guys again" kind of deal. Scipio, with about 35,000 men, was ready to prove that Rome's tenacity was more than a match for Hannibal's legendary cunning. The battle was intense, with Hannibal deploying his elephants in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide. But this wasn't his first rodeo, and Scipio had done his homework. The Roman general cleverly neutralized the elephant charge by creating lanes for them to pass through, effectively turning Hannibal's trump card into a dud. The battle was a brutal affair, but it ended with a decisive Roman victory. Hannibal's forces were not just defeated, they were dismantled, and the dream of a Carthaginian triumph crumbled like a poorly built sandcastle. With defeat at Zama, Hannibal was forced into an uncomfortable role: peacemaker. Carthage sued for peace in 201 BC, and the terms were harsh. Rome demanded a hefty indemnity of 10,000 talents. Think of it as $1 billion settlement in today's money, the surrender of the Carthaginian fleet, and the disbandment of their army. Carthage was left a shadow of its former self, a fallen empire licking its wounds under the watchful eye of a triumphant Rome. So, what do you do when you're Hannibal Barca, war hero turned war zero? Well, you pivot, of course. Hannibal's next act was far from the battlefields. He became a statesman, working to reform Carthage's political structure and stabilize its economy. Always the multitasker, Hannibal even introduced tax reforms that helped Carthage pay off its colossal war debt ahead of schedule. It turns out, when Hannibal wasn't leading armies, he was busy being a financial wizard, proving that his genius wasn't confined to the battlefield. But Rome, ever the sore winner, wasn't content to let Hannibal live out his days in peace. In 195 BC, they pressured Carthage to exile him, fearing he was plotting another uprising. This sent Hannibal on a world tour of ancient realms, a kind of ancient diplomatic rock star, albeit one with a dark cloud perpetually hanging over him. He found refuge in the courts of various Eastern kings, offering his military expertise in exchange for sanctuary. His most notable stint was with King Antiochus Roman III of the Seleucid Empire, who was gearing up for his own rumble with Rome. But even there, Hannibal found himself more of a political pawn than a player, his influence waning as the years wore on. In 183 BC, in what can only be described as the ultimate take-my-ball-and-go-home moment, Hannibal chose to end his life rather than be captured by the Romans. It was a dramatic exit for a man whose life had been a series of dramatic entrances. By taking poison, Hannibal ensured that his legacy would be one of defiance to the very end, an enduring symbol of resistance against the Roman juggernaut. Now, let's talk legacy, because Hannibal's is as complicated as a soap opera family tree. On one hand, he was the tactical genius who taught Rome some hard lessons in humility. His maneuvers at battles like Cannae are still studied in military academies around the world, a testament to his enduring impact on the art of war. Yet, his inability to convert battlefield victories into strategic success highlights the limits of even the most brilliant commanders. Hannibal's life was a masterclass in audacity, yet it also serves as a cautionary tale about the harsh realities of geopolitics and logistics. The man versus the myth. Hannibal is often romanticized as the quintessential underdog, the lone wolf who dared to challenge the Roman behemoth. But the reality was far more nuanced. He wasn't just a rebel with a cause. He was a strategist who understood the intricacies of warfare and diplomacy, even if those intricacies sometimes got the better of him. His story reminds us that history is rarely black and white, and that sometimes the most compelling narratives are the ones that embrace the shades of gray. So, what's the takeaway from Hannibal's storied life? Perhaps it's that even the grandest plans can go awry, especially when elephants are involved. Hannibal's tale is a testament to human ambition, the relentless pursuit of glory, and the bittersweet taste of fleeting triumphs in the face of overwhelming odds. He was a man who dared to dream big, but ultimately his legacy is a reminder that sometimes the world has a funny way of humbling even the greatest among us. As we put a bow on Hannibal's saga, one can't help but reflect on the enduring allure of his story. It's a tale that continues to captivate and inspire, a narrative that speaks to the heart of human endeavor and the eternal struggle for greatness. In the end, Hannibal Barca was more than just a military commander. He was a symbol of defiance, a beacon of audacity, and a reminder that history's most compelling figures are often those who dared to challenge the status quo, even when the odds were stacked against them. In the grand theater of history, where the drama often outshines any Netflix series, Empress Myeongseong's story kicks off with a splash of intrigue, and dare I say, a touch of melodrama. Born as Min Yaeong in 1851 into the Min clan, a family not exactly rolling in gold coins, but still with enough pedigree to get a seat at the royal table, Myeongseong's early life was a whirlwind of societal expectations and family ambitions. By the tender age of 16, she was thrust into the political cauldron of the Joseon dynasty, all thanks to a royal matchmaking process that makes today's dating apps look like child's play. Back in 1866, King Gajang was in the market for a queen. Literally. The role of the queen wasn't just about looking pretty in hanbok, the traditional Korean dress, and waving regally. No, it was a political chess piece, and the Mins had a strategic mind that made even the most seasoned chess masters look like amateurs. The king's father, the Diwangan, basically the guy pulling all the strings while the king was still figuring out which fork to use at dinner, wanted a queen who wouldn't overshadow his power. Enter Min Yaeong, intelligent but not yet a known quantity, or so he thought. Within the labyrinth of palace walls, Myeongseong quickly displayed a knack for political maneuvering that made Machiavelli's The Prince seem like light reading. Marrying King Gajang at 16, she had to navigate a world where court ladies could make or break you with just a whisper. In the Joseon dynasty, you didn't just marry the king. You married into a world of palace intrigue and endless etiquette manuals that could rival the length of war and peace. Picture the scene. A young empress trying to make her mark while dodging courtly gossip more dangerous than a game of telephone. The palace was a place where alliances were as fragile as a porcelain teacup, and one wrong move could lead to a very literal fall from grace, or worse, an invitation to drink tea laced with something a bit more sinister. Myeongseong had to be as sharp as a sword, a quality she possessed in abundance. Her marriage to Gajang marked the beginning of a partnership, albeit a complicated one. That would see her become a formidable political force. While Gajang was technically the king, it was Myeongseong who often took the wheel, steering the ship through the stormy seas of 19th century Korean politics. She had a strategic mind that could rival the best military generals, and she wasn't afraid to use it. And while we're on the subject of strategy, let's not forget about her economic savvy. The Joseon dynasty wasn't exactly swimming in prosperity at this time. The economy was more like a leaky boat taking on water. Myeongseong, however, had the foresight to encourage modernization and open Korea to foreign technologies, a move that was as controversial as it was visionary. But we'll get to those juicy details later in the series. Living in the royal palace was no fairy tale. It was a pressure cooker of expectations, where the wrong choice of hairstyle could spark a diplomatic incident. Yet Myeongseong proved to be more than just a pretty face. She was a queen with a mission, determined to secure her nation's future, even if it meant playing the long game. As we delve into Myeongseong's rise, one might wonder how she managed to keep her head, figuratively and literally, amidst the cutthroat world of palace politics. The answer lies in her ability to outwit her rivals, forge powerful alliances, and maintain a steely resolve that was as enduring as any legend. Her story is a testament to the power of intellect and resilience in a world where every move was scrutinized and every word dissected. So, as we set the stage for this epic saga of power, intrigue, and resilience, remember that Empress Myeongseong's journey was as much about survival as it was about ruling with wisdom and tenacity. She was a queen who defied expectations, and her story is one that continues to inspire and captivate, reminding us that history is often stranger and more thrilling than fiction. As we continue our deep dive into the life of Empress Myeongseong, let's cast a critical eye over the chessboard of 19th century Korean politics. If you thought Game of Thrones had a complicated plot, try navigating the Joseon dynasty at its political nadir. The dynasty was showing more cracks than a century-old teacup, with internal strife, and external pressures mounting by the day. Enter Myeongseong, who was more than ready to shake up the status quo with her own brand of political innovation. Now, if you're imagining a regal gathering with Myeongseong surrounded by ministers eagerly awaiting her next decree, think again. The reality was much more akin to a group of cats reluctantly herded into a room, each with its agenda and a penchant for scratching when cornered. The Empress had to deal with a court that was as divided as a pizza on a diet plan. Factions within the palace were like the shifting sands of the Gobi Desert, constantly changing and treacherous. One of Myeongseong's boldest moves was to foster alliances with foreign powers, a strategy as risky as walking a tightrope over a pit of hungry tigers. She saw the writing on the wall. Joseon was a small fish in an increasingly shark-infested international pond. The Western powers, with their steely gunboats and insatiable appetites for expansion, along with Japan's own imperial ambitions, were circling like vultures. So Myeongseong figured, why not turn potential foes into friends, or at least temporary allies? She began by opening the door to Western technologies and ideas, much to the chagrin of traditionalists who probably thought electricity was a passing fad. The truth was, Korea's infrastructure was about as modern as a horse-drawn carriage in a world racing towards steam engines and telegraphs. Myeongseong's push for modernization wasn't just progressive. It was absolutely necessary. She recognized that embracing change was the only way to prevent Korea from becoming a mere pawn in the great game of colonialism. But let's not romanticize her as a lone beacon of enlightenment in a sea of resistance. Her vision wasn't exactly a hit with everyone. Conservative factions in the court saw her as a troublemaker, someone who was galloping towards change while they'd rather trot back to the good old days. It was like watching someone try to introduce Wi-Fi to a landline phone convention. And then there were the internal reforms. Oh, the glorious absurdity of trying to reform a bureaucracy that seemed designed to frustrate rather than facilitate. The Joseon government was legendary for its convoluted processes, where getting anything done required more stamps than a philatelist's dream collection. Myeongseong started by simplifying the tax system, which was about as straightforward as a plate of spaghetti. Her reforms aimed to make the system more equitable, which in theory sounded great, but in practice was like trying to teach a cat to fetch. Her efforts to streamline the government were met with more resistance than a stubborn mule. Those who benefited from the old ways were loath to give up their perks. Imagine telling a kid they can't have dessert before dinner anymore. It didn't go down well, but Myeongseong was nothing if not persistent. She knew that for Korea to stand a chance against external threats, it needed to be strong internally. Her reforms were the foundation stones for a more robust administration, one that could withstand the pressures of both internal dissent and external aggression. Of course, palace life wasn't all about serious reforms and strategic alliances. There were also the inevitable squabbles, the kind that make for juicy gossip columns. The palace was a hotbed of intrigue, where courtiers jockeyed for advantage like players in a high-stakes poker game. Petty rivalries and personal vendettas were part and parcel of daily life. If someone didn't like the cut of your jib, you better watch your back, or your tea. The Empress had to navigate this treacherous terrain with the skill of a diplomat and the patience of a saint. She had her allies, of course, but trust was a rare commodity, more precious than gold. Her ability to forge alliances and maintain a semblance of unity amid the chaos was nothing short of remarkable. Yet, despite her formidable political acumen, she faced constant challenges from those who underestimated her, often at their peril. Myeongseong's story during this period is a testament to the power of resilience and vision. She was a woman who saw a future beyond the immediate chaos and worked tirelessly to achieve it. Her legacy is one of strength and determination, qualities that continue to resonate today. But as our story unfolds, remember that the path to power was fraught with danger, and that maintaining it was an art form in itself. So as we leave Myeongseong plotting her next move in the Game of Thrones that was the Joseon court, keep in mind that her story is far from over. Her next steps would not only shape her own destiny, but also the fate of an entire nation. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of a woman who was as much a strategist as she was a survivor, navigating a world where every decision was a gamble and every ally a potential rival. As Myeongseong plotted her next moves in the high-stakes chess game of Joseon politics, she was well aware that the board extended far beyond the palace walls. The late 19th century was a time when international diplomacy could be likened to a masquerade ball, where nations wore masks of friendship while hiding daggers beneath their cloaks. Korea, sandwiched between the expanding empires of Japan and China, was a small player caught in the crossfire of titanic ambitions, and Myeongseong, with her formidable political acumen, was determined to keep Korea from being trampled underfoot. Let's start with Japan, the neighbor who was both a partner and a perpetual thorn in Korea's side. The Treaty of Gangwon in 1876 was a pivotal moment, opening Korea to Japanese influence like a can of worms that couldn't be resealed. This treaty, signed under duress, was a classic example of diplomacy with a side of intimidation. Japan, flaunting its newly acquired Western-style military prowess, effectively forced Korea to recognize its sovereignty and opened up several ports to Japanese trade. It was as if Japan had just sent Korea a friend request on social media, but with a note saying, "Ignore at your peril." Meanwhile, China, Korea's traditional ally and historical big brother, was not about to relinquish its influence without a fight. The Qing dynasty viewed Korea as a tributary state, a notion as outdated as a rotary phone in an era of smartphones. But while the Chinese emperor fancied himself as the benevolent guardian of Korea, the reality was more about maintaining control than offering protection. The Sino-Korean relationship was a diplomatic tango, with China trying to lead while Korea stepped on its toes. Enter Empress Myeongseong, the maestro of this international orchestra, determined to conduct a symphony of alliances that would safeguard Korea's sovereignty. Her strategy was as bold as it was necessary: play the two behemoths against each other while courting Western powers as potential referees. It was a balancing act that would make a Cirque du Soleil performer break a sweat. One of Myeongseong's notable diplomatic maneuvers was to send envoys to Russia, a move that raised more than a few eyebrows in both Tokyo and Beijing. Russia, with its sprawling empire and strategic ambitions in the Far East, was the wild card in this geopolitical poker game. The 1884 Korea-Russia Treaty, which promised mutual friendship and assistance, was like inviting a bear to a picnic, potentially useful, but equally likely to eat all the sandwiches. And then there was the United States, the fresh-faced kid on the imperial block, eager to play ball in Asia. The Korea-U.S. Treaty of Amity and Commerce in 1882 was a landmark, marking the first formal diplomatic relations between the two nations. America came promising trade and goodwill, but let's be real, it was hardly a charity case. The U.S. was looking for a foothold in Asia, and Korea was a promising candidate, much like a real estate investor spotting a fixer-upper in a prime location. But let's not paint Myeongseong as some kind of diplomatic Cinderella, waving a wand to solve all of Korea's problems. Her efforts to modernize and strengthen Korea's international standing were met with skepticism from within. Many in the court viewed her Western alliances as a betrayal of tradition, much like adding pineapple to a classic kimchi recipe. The Empress's forward-thinking approach was a tough sell to those who saw the old ways as a security blanket, albeit one full of holes. As these international tensions simmered, the internal landscape in Korea was anything but serene. Factions within the court were as volatile as a keg of gunpowder, each with its own vision for Korea's future. The conservative faction, led by the Daewongun, King Gajong's father, was particularly hostile to Myeongseong's policies. The Daewongun, a stalwart of traditionalism, saw modernization as an erosion of Joseon's cultural identity, a sentiment echoed by those who preferred the familiarity of the past to the uncertainty of the future. Meanwhile, Myeongseong's supporters, often younger officials and reformists, argued that Korea's survival depended on its ability to adapt. They pointed to Japan's rapid transformation into a modern industrial power as proof that change was not only possible but necessary. The Empress, caught between these opposing forces, had to navigate a minefield of political intrigue where every step could be her last. It was in this climate of tension and uncertainty that the Gapsing coup of 1884 unfolded, a short-lived but intense power grab by pro-Japanese reformists who sought to overthrow the conservative establishment and install a modern government. The coup, lasting just 3 days, was a dramatic reminder of the volatile nature of Korean politics. It was as if someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail into the already burning house of cards that was the Joseon court. The coup was swiftly quashed by Chinese troops stationed in Korea, a move that underscored China's determination to retain its influence. The aftermath left Myeongseong in a precarious position, walking a tightrope between appeasing China and not alienating Japan, all while keeping Western powers intrigued but not intrusive. It was diplomacy by juggling act, with the Empress as the ringmaster trying to keep all the balls in the air. In the wake of the Gapsin coup, Myeongseong intensified her efforts to solidify Korea's international alliances. She understood that Korea could not stand alone against the growing tide of imperialism. Her diplomatic overtures to Russia, for instance, were part of a broader strategy to create a counterbalance against Japanese ambitions. The Empress was playing a high-stakes game of chess, with Korea's future hanging in the balance. Yet, even as she navigated these turbulent waters, Myeongseong faced relentless opposition from within. The conservative elite, uncomfortable with the pace of change, continued to undermine her authority. They viewed her as a dangerous reformer, someone who was willing to sacrifice Korea's cultural heritage at the altar of modernization. This internal resistance was a constant thorn in her side, complicating her efforts to steer Korea towards a more secure future. Despite these challenges, Myeongseong remained undeterred. Her vision for Korea was one of strength and independence, a nation capable of standing on its own against the forces of imperialism. Her diplomatic efforts, though fraught with difficulties, were a testament to her determination and resilience. She was a leader who refused to be cowed by adversity, a woman who saw the bigger picture even when others were blinded by short-term interests. As we pause at this juncture in Myeongseong's story, it's clear that her diplomatic efforts were a critical component of her legacy. She was a pioneer in navigating the complex landscape of international relations, forging alliances that would shape Korea's future. Her story is a reminder that diplomacy is as much about vision and courage as it is about negotiation and compromise. And while her journey is far from over, the seeds she planted during this tumultuous period would play a crucial role in the events to come. Stay tuned as we explore the next chapter in the life of Korea's last empress, a woman who defied convention and dared to dream of a better future for her nation. With the stage set for the next chapter in Myeongseong's life, let's dive into the high-stakes world of espionage and resistance, where the Empress was less a figurehead and more a queen on a chessboard, orchestrating moves that would make even James Bond raise an eyebrow. Her influence had reached its zenith, but with great power came a tsunami of challenges, not least the encroaching shadow of Japan, whose ambitions were growing faster than a weed in a neglected garden. By the 1890, Japan's imperial dreams had become a waking nightmare for Korea. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894-1895, was like a thunderstorm on the horizon, foreboding and impossible to ignore. Japan wanted Korea in its sphere, and it wasn't exactly sending love letters. Myeongseong, ever the strategist, knew she needed to pull a few aces from her sleeve. Enter her secretive network of spies, a clandestine operation that would make MI6 look like a book club. Let's peel back the curtain on this covert world. Myeongseong's spy ring was as eclectic as it was effective. It included everyone from palace eunuchs to courtesans, because who better to gather secrets than those who are often overlooked? These operatives were tasked with gathering intelligence on Japanese movements and reporting back with the kind of details that would give a gossip columnist a run for their money. The information they collected was crucial, allowing Myeongseong to anticipate and counter Japanese strategies like a chess master, predicting an opponent's next 10 moves. But let's not romanticize this as some foolproof system. It was as risky as playing poker with your cards facing up. Espionage in the Joseon court was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided critical insights. On the other, it was a game of trust in a kingdom where alliances could shift faster than the weather. One wrong move or misplaced confidence could lead to disaster, and the stakes were nothing short of life and death. And speaking of trust, let's debunk a popular myth, that Myeongseong was an invincible force, untouched by the chaos swirling around her. The truth. She was as vulnerable as a single candle in a hurricane, constantly buffeted by the gales of political intrigue. The Empress was a formidable player, yes, but she wasn't immune to missteps or betrayal. Her spy network, for all its successes, was not infallible. There were leaks, double agents, and those who were more interested in lining their pockets than serving the crown. Despite these challenges, Myeongseong's ability to wield influence was nothing short of remarkable. At the height of her power, she was like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of political maneuvers designed to keep Korea from falling into the hands of its neighbors. Her resistance against Japanese encroachment was bold, daring, and at times downright audacious. She used her position to rally support from other nations, reminding them that Korea was not just a pawn to be traded or sacrificed in the great game of empire. Yet, even as she fought to maintain Korea's sovereignty, Myeongseong was acutely aware of the economic and social realities of her time. The Joseon dynasty's coffers were more akin to a leaky bucket than a treasure chest, drained by years of internal strife and external pressures. Myeongseong understood that to resist Japanese domination, Korea needed more than just diplomatic support. It needed economic strength. Her push for modernization, though controversial, had laid the groundwork for this, but there was still a long way to go. The challenge was formidable: how to transform a nation while under siege from within and without. Myeongseong's efforts to reform Korea's economy were akin to trying to build a ship while at sea. She encouraged the development of industries, sought foreign investments, and attempted to streamline the cumbersome bureaucracy that had long plagued the kingdom. Her vision was clear: a Korea that was economically robust and capable of standing on its own 2 feet. But let's not sugarcoat the situation. Economic reform was a Herculean task fraught with resistance from those who benefited from the status quo. The entrenched elite were less than enthusiastic about changes that threatened their power and privileges. Imagine trying to convince a cat to take a bath. Myeongseong faced an uphill battle against a system resistant to change. As we examine the peak of Myeongseong's influence, it's crucial to recognize the complexities of her position. She was a leader caught in the crosshairs of history, trying to navigate a path that would ensure Korea's survival. Her story is not one of easy victories or unblemished triumphs. It's a narrative of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, of a woman who dared to defy convention and challenge the forces arrayed against her. As we leave this chapter open-ended, with threads still untangling in the tapestry of history, remember that the Empress's journey was far from over. Her struggles against Japanese encroachment and her efforts to strengthen Korea's position on the world stage would continue to shape her legacy. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of Empress Myeongseong, exploring the next phase of her story and the indelible mark she left on a nation's history. As Myeongseong's story steered toward its final act, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Picture a nation teetering on the brink as Japan loomed ominously like a hawk eyeing its prey. The Empress, ever the chess player, knew her next moves could mean the difference between sovereignty and subjugation. But fate, with its cruel sense of irony, had a different endgame in mind. It's 1895, and the air in the Joseon court was as thick with tension as a thriller novel's climax. Myeongseong, having woven a web of diplomacy and modernization efforts, found herself at the nexus of national and international conflicts. The Japanese, fresh from their victory in the First Sino-Japanese War, were no longer content with just hovering at Korea's borders. They wanted more: control, influence, and a slice of Korea's political pie. Enter the Gabo reformists, a group of pro-Japanese officials who saw alignment with Japan as the future's golden ticket. They envisioned a Korea transformed through the lens of Japanese modernization, not unlike a makeover reality show, but with considerably higher stakes. For them, Myeongseong's resistance to Japanese domination was less a patriotic stand and more an inconvenient roadblock. The Empress, with her penchant for crafting alliances and playing hardball with the best of them, had become a thorn in their side, a thorn they were determined to pluck. On the fateful dawn of October 8, 1895, the wheels of conspiracy turned with chilling precision. A small army of Japanese agents, along with Korean collaborators, infiltrated Gyeongbokgung Palace. Their mission was as audacious as it was brutal: eliminate Empress Myeongseong and pave the way for a new order. The assassination was executed with ruthless efficiency, marking a tragic chapter in Korea's history. In a matter of hours, the Empress who had defied empires and courted allies was gone, her life extinguished in a violent coup that sent shockwaves through the nation. The aftermath of Myeongseong's assassination was as chaotic as a Shakespearean tragedy. King Gajang, her husband and ally, was left reeling, his court thrown into disarray. The Japanese, having removed their most formidable opponent, wasted no time asserting their influence. The Garbo reformists quickly moved to consolidate power, enacting a series of sweeping changes that would reshape Korea's political landscape. It was as if a whirlwind had swept through the palace, leaving a new reality in its wake. But let's pause for a moment and address the myths that sprang up like weeds after Myeongseong's death. Some paint her as a martyr, a tragic heroine who stood defiantly against imperialism. Others cast her as a divisive figure whose actions invited disaster. The truth, as is often the case with history, lies somewhere in the messy middle. Myeongseong was neither saint nor sinner. She was a complex, driven leader navigating a world where power was as fleeting as smoke. Her assassination was not just a personal tragedy, but a turning point that reshaped Korea's path. Economically, the cost of losing Myeongseong was steep. Her efforts to modernize Korea had planted seeds of progress that needed nurturing. The Garbo reformists, while pushing for change, were more focused on aligning with Japan than fostering independent growth. It was as if a master chef had left the kitchen, and the new cooks were more interested in following a foreign recipe than perfecting their own. Korea's economy, already strained, faced the challenge of adapting to this new reality. The political shift following Myeongseong's assassination was profound. The old guard, with its conservative values and resistance to change, found itself sidelined as pro-Japanese elements gained ground. The Daewongun, King Gajang's father, was reinstated as a figurehead, a symbolic nod to traditionalism even as Japan tightened its grip. It was a precarious balancing act, with Korea caught between the past and an uncertain future. Yet amid this turbulence, the legacy of Empress Myeongseong endured. Her life and death became a rallying cry for Korean nationalism, a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. In the years that followed, her story was retold, embellished, and mythologized, transforming her into a legend whose influence transcended her lifetime. She became a figure of inspiration, a reminder that even in defeat, the struggle for sovereignty and identity persisted. As we wrap up Myeongseong's saga, let's reflect on the impermanence of power and the enduring nature of legacy. Her life was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where vision and ambition collide with the harsh realities of politics. In the grand theater of history, Myeongseong played her part with courage and conviction, leaving behind a legacy that continues to resonate. Her story is a reminder that in the face of overwhelming odds, resilience and determination can carve a path through the darkest of times. So, as we bid farewell to Korea's last empress, remember her as both a strategist and a symbol, a woman who dared to dream of a future for her nation, even as the forces of history conspired against her. Her legacy is etched into the fabric of Korea's story, a narrative of struggle, hope, and the relentless pursuit of sovereignty. In the heart of the bustling, medieval city of Mainz, Germany, Johannes Gutenberg wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Rather, he had a family crest emblazoned with a sledgehammer. The year was 1400, give or take a few because record-keeping back then was as precise as a medieval weather forecast. His family, the Gensfleisch zum Gutenberg clan, was firmly planted in the upper crust of society, thanks to their metalworking success. Were the kind of folks who could afford to have their name sound like a German tongue twister, and who dabbled in minting coins. Literally, they were making money before it was cool. Now, if you think Gutenberg's early life was all about lounging in castles and sipping mead, think again. The 15th century was a time when Europe was like a pot of stew, constantly bubbling over with economic and political changes. The Black Death had swept through just a few decades earlier, trimming down Europe's population by a third. Talk about a forced diet plan. But fewer people meant less competition for jobs and resources, which created a burgeoning middle class eager for new ideas and opportunities. The Holy Roman Empire, which Mainz was part of, was more of a loose confederation than a centralized power. Think of it like a medieval version of trying to herd cats, with hundreds of semi-independent states, each with its own ruler who probably thought he was the next Charlemagne. This patchwork of territories meant that cities like Mainz were vibrant centers of trade and innovation, providing the perfect backdrop for a young Johannes to cut his teeth, figuratively, not literally, with metalwork. Before Gutenberg became the granddaddy of the printing press, he was knee-deep in the family trade as a skilled metalworker and inventor. Metalwork was a craft that required precision, patience, and a dash of creativity. It wasn't exactly glamorous, but it was steady work, and it paid the bills. Plus, it had the added bonus of requiring a meticulous attention to detail, a trait that would come in handy later when he started dealing with tiny, fiddly pieces of movable type. While the romanticized version of Gutenberg paints him as a lone genius who had a sudden, divine revelation about the printing press, the truth was a lot messier and more human. The path to innovation was littered with trial and error, setbacks, and a fair bit of frustration. Picture Gutenberg hunched over his workbench, surrounded by bits of metal and failed prototypes, cursing in whatever the 15th century equivalent of "oh, come on" was. His journey was less about a single eureka moment and more about a series of, well, that didn't work, let's try this instead, scenarios. The economic context of the time played a significant role in shaping Gutenberg's path. The demand for books and written materials was on the rise, thanks to the growing number of literate folks who wanted something more substantial than just religious texts to read. Scribes, those human photocopiers of the day, were the main producers of books, painstakingly copying texts by hand. It was a slow and expensive process, and anyone who's ever tried to write a term paper by hand can sympathize. Politically, the landscape was equally ripe for change. The Catholic Church, which wielded considerable power, had a monopoly on knowledge dissemination. Books were primarily in Latin, and if you didn't speak the language of the learned elite, tough luck. But the winds of change were blowing, and the desire for books in vernacular languages was growing. This was Gutenberg's chance to capitalize on a market that was ready to explode. He wasn't just an inventor. He was an entrepreneur with a keen eye for opportunity. The combination of Mainz's status as a trade hub, the burgeoning middle class's hunger for books, and the chaotic political scene created a perfect storm for innovation. Gutenberg's metalworking experience gave him the technical skills he needed, but it was the economic and social shifts that gave him the reason to apply those skills to something new. Rather than being struck by a bolt of inspiration, Gutenberg's journey was one of persistence, adaptation, and a bit of stubborn determination. So, as we delve into the life of Johannes Gutenberg, let's remember that the man who changed the world with his printing press was not just a visionary inventor, but also a savvy businessman navigating the choppy waters of 15th century Europe. He was a man of his times, shaped by the world around him and driven by the same desires and frustrations that drive us all. And as we dig deeper into his story, let's keep in mind that history, much like Gutenberg's journey, is rarely a straight line. It's a series of twists, turns, and the occasional detour. But before Gutenberg could become the Elon Musk of the 15th century, he had to endure a few bumps in the road, one of them being his rather ill-fated venture into the world of pilgrimage souvenirs. That's right. Before he was revolutionizing the printed word, Gutenberg was trying to make his mark by cashing in on the medieval equivalent of "I Heart Jerusalem" mugs in the year 1430-something, because medieval record-keeping was as consistent as a cat's loyalty. Gutenberg found himself in Strasbourg, a city that was both a bustling trade hub and a magnet for pilgrims. These God-fearing travelers needed mementos of their spiritual journeys, and Gutenberg thought, why not me? He proposed to create small mirrors that supposedly captured the holy aura of relics at Aachen, making them a heart commodity among pilgrims. But as luck would have it, or wouldn't, there was a plague outbreak, and the pilgrimage got postponed. The mirrors became as useful as a chocolate teapot, and Gutenberg was left holding a bag of shiny, but otherwise worthless, trinkets. This early entrepreneurial misstep wasn't just a personal setback, it was a financial fiasco. Bankruptcy was the medieval way of getting a wake-up call, and Gutenberg got his loud and clear. But he wasn't one to dwell on failure. Instead, he packed up his ambitions and headed back to Mainz. Here, He rubbed elbows with Johann Fust, a man whose wallet was as hefty as his ambition. Fust was a financier. Think of him as the medieval venture capitalist, ready to invest in promising startups, but not afraid to pull the plug if things went south. Gutenberg and Fust struck a deal that was as precarious as a tightrope walk. Fust agreed to fund Gutenberg's printing experiments, fronting 800 guilders in 1,450. Now, if you're wondering how much that would be today, let's just say Gutenberg was essentially handed the medieval equivalent of a small lottery win. But this wasn't a no-strings-attached situation. Fust expected returns, and he expected them faster than a scribe could say manuscript. The financial pressures were mounting, and the stakes were high. If Gutenberg's movable type gamble didn't pay off, he'd be facing more than just a bruised ego. Into the legal battles, stage left. In 1455, the partnership between Gutenberg and Fust hit a snag reminiscent of a reality TV drama. Fust, perhaps feeling like he was funding a money pit, sued Gutenberg for not repaying the loans, plus interest. It was a cutthroat world, and Fust's eyes were on his investment, not on Gutenberg's dream of democratizing knowledge. The ensuing court case dragged Gutenberg through the mud. The verdict: Fust won, and he seized control of the printing workshop. This was a medieval plot twist that rivaled any modern-day courtroom saga. Fust and his son-in-law, Peter Schoeffer, took over the operations, leaving Gutenberg out in the cold. But while the lawsuit was a harsh blow, it wasn't the end for our beleaguered inventor. Gutenberg's story is a testament to the gritty reality of innovation. It's not all light bulbs and eureka moments. It's also about navigating the rough waters of medieval capitalism, where investors were as ruthless as pirates. The printing press, which would soon change the world, was born not just from genius, but from the relentless push and pull of financial necessity and personal determination. So, as we leave Gutenberg at this crossroads, remember that behind every great invention is a tale of human struggle and resilience. We'll continue to unravel how this tenacious inventor, despite legal woes and financial ruin, managed to etch his name in history, not with a quill, but with the revolutionary clatter of movable type. Stay tuned, because the real story of Johannes Gutenberg is just heating up. As we find Gutenberg at the crossroads of triumph and turmoil, it's time to zoom in on the nitty-gritty of his groundbreaking gadget, the movable type printing press. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a sleek, pre-assembled piece of tech that arrived in a shiny box with a user manual. Nope, it was more like a DIY project from medieval hell. Think IKEA flat pack, but without the helpful little Allen key. The brilliance behind Gutenberg's innovation was in the details. Instead of carving entire pages of text into woodblocks, which was like trying to carve a Michelangelo out of a marshmallow, Gutenberg's genius was to create individual, reusable metal letters. These letters could be arranged and rearranged to form words, sentences, and entire pages. Each piece of type was cast in a mold, and creating these molds was no small feat. This required a level of precision that would put even the most meticulous of metal workers to the test. The pieces had to be uniform in size and height, so when inked and pressed, they'd leave a consistent impression. Now, Gutenberg didn't just pluck this idea from the ether. He was standing on the shoulders of giants, or perhaps more aptly, squatting in the shadows of previous innovations. The Chinese had been experimenting with movable type as early as the 11th century, but it was Gutenberg who cracked the code for mass production. His secret sauce, an alloy of lead, tin, and antimony that proved to be the Goldilocks of metals, just right for durability and sharpness. Add to that a new oil-based ink, which stuck to the metal type better than the old water-based ones did, and Gutenberg was cooking with gas, or whatever the medieval equivalent was. Of course, this wasn't a one-man show. Gutenberg had an entire team of craftsmen working tirelessly, sweating over each tiny piece of type like medieval elves in Santa's workshop. Trial and error were the names of the game. If you ever think your printer jams are frustrating, imagine dealing with a contraption that required constant tweaking just to avoid turning pages into a blotchy mess. Gutenberg's workshop was more akin to a modern-day startup's garage, full of promise, but also littered with failed prototypes. Now, onto the piece de resistance, the Gutenberg Bible. Ah, yes, the book that launched 1,000 libraries, or so the legend goes. The reality, It wasn't exactly flying off the shelves like the latest Harry Potter. The first print run, completed around 1455, consisted of about 180 copies. Of these, only about 49 survive today, and even fewer in their entirety. These Bibles were impressive, no doubt. Each was a hand-illuminated masterpiece, a labor of love that combined the mechanical with the artisanal. But they weren't cheap. Each copy cost the equivalent of 3 years' wages for a clerk, hardly pocket change. In terms of impact, the Gutenberg Bible was more of a slow burn than a wildfire. Sure, it was a monumental achievement, but it took time for its significance to ripple out across Europe. The real game changer was the printing press itself, which democratized access to knowledge in ways previously unimaginable. By the end of the 15th century, over 20 million volumes had been printed on various presses across Europe. Compare that to the mere tens of thousands of manuscripts produced in the entire millennium before, and you've got yourself a bona fide information revolution. The socio-political landscape was ripe for such a revolution. Europe was in the throes of change, with the Renaissance stirring up a renewed interest in classical knowledge and humanism. The printing press became the wind beneath the wings of this intellectual awakening, allowing ideas to spread faster than a medieval rumor. It wasn't just scholars and monks getting their hands on these printed wonders. The burgeoning middle class, with their newfound literacy and disposable income, created a demand for books written in vernacular languages. Finally, something to read that didn't require a Latin dictionary the size of a small child. Moreover, the press became a thorn in the side of the Catholic Church, which had enjoyed a cozy monopoly over knowledge for centuries. Suddenly, the gatekeepers of information found their grip slipping as reformist ideas circulated with unprecedented speed. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, for instance, were printed and disseminated so widely that they ignited the Protestant Reformation. Gutenberg's press didn't just change the way people read. It changed what they read, and crucially, who got to decide what was worth reading. And yet, let's not romanticize this too much. The printing press was a product of its time, subject to the same economic and political forces that shaped its inventor's life. It was a tool that could be used for enlightenment or propaganda, depending on who wielded it. The road to mass literacy and the free flow of ideas was paved with conflicts, censorship, and the occasional book-burning bonfire. But that's a tale for another day. In the end, the story of Gutenberg and his printing press is one of relentless innovation and adaptation, driven by a world on the cusp of modernity. It's a testament to the messy, chaotic, and ultimately human process of invention. As we leave Johannes Gutenberg tinkering with his precious type, remember that the real legacy of his work is not just in the books that were printed, but in the ideas that were unleashed upon the world. Stay tuned, because the saga of the printing press is far from over. It's only just getting started. And so, as the ink dried on the pages of history, Johannes Gutenberg found himself not at the pinnacle of success, but rather in the middle of a medieval courtroom drama that would make even the most seasoned reality TV producer blush. You see, the printing press was a technological marvel, but it was also a money pit that would make Silicon Valley investors squirm in their ergonomic chairs. Enter Johann Fust, not just a financier, but the early equivalent of a venture capitalist with a penchant for legal battles that would make any law school professor nod in approval. Let's rewind to the year 1450, when Fust and Gutenberg shook hands on a deal that seemed promising enough to warrant a celebratory stein of ale. Fust lent Gutenberg 800 guilders, an amount that would have bought you a decent manor or two back in the day, to fund the revolutionary printing project. But in a twist that would make any budding entrepreneur wince, this wasn't free money. It came with strings attached thicker than a knight's armor. Fust expected returns, and not just the thanks for believing in me kind. We're talking cold, hard cash, with interest that would make a modern credit card look like a charitable donation. Fast forward to 1455, and Gutenberg found himself in hot water, not unlike a frog slowly realizing it's in a pot on a medieval stove. Fust, feeling more like a spurned lover than a business partner, sued Gutenberg for failing to repay the loan, plus interest. The result? Fust marched into Gutenberg's workshop with a court decree that effectively handed him the keys to the kingdom, or in this case, the printing press itself. It was a medieval plot twist worthy of Shakespearean drama, with Gutenberg cast out of his own creation like an inventor in a bad breakup. The irony here is thicker than a scribe's ink. Gutenberg, the man who had changed the world with movable type, ended up losing control of his brainchild. Imagine being the Steve Jobs of the 15th century, only to have your apple confiscated by a guy named Johannes who decided he wanted a slice of your pie. It's a tale as old as time. Genius meets greed, and greed wins the first round. But let's not forget that, while Fust got the spoils, Gutenberg had already set the wheels of change in motion. The press continued churning out texts, and the knowledge floodgates were wide open. Yet, like many visionary inventors before and after him, Gutenberg's personal ledger didn't reflect the impact he had on the world. He spent the latter part of his life in relative obscurity, relying on the charity of others, including Archbishop Adolf of Nassau, who, presumably out of respect or perhaps pity, provided him with a small pension. Now, it would be easy to paint Gutenberg as a tragic figure, a misunderstood genius who never got his due in life. But let's add a dash of perspective here. While his financial woes were real, Gutenberg's true legacy was not in the guilders he lost, but in the ideas he unleashed. His invention didn't just print books, it printed the future. And like many great artists, his acclaim only soared posthumously. Today, we might not remember him as the financial wizard of Mainz, but we certainly revere him as the father of mass communication. The Gutenberg Bible, that luxurious tome that cost a clerk 3 years' wages, became the symbol of his enduring legacy. Surviving copies of this magnificent work are now treasured artifacts, housed in museums and libraries like literary crown jewels. These Bibles were the gateway to a world where information was no longer the exclusive property of the elite and the ecclesiastical. They were the seeds of an information revolution that would see literacy rates soar and intellectual horizons broaden like never before. In the centuries that followed, Gutenberg's printing press became synonymous with knowledge, enlightenment, and occasionally a bit of chaos. The Protestant Reformation, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, all these seismic shifts in human thought were catalyzed by the humble press. It's a testament to the power of technology, a reminder that once an idea is set free, there's no telling where it will take us. So, as we consider Gutenberg's story, let's remember it's not just about the man or the machine, but about the ripple effect they created. Gutenberg may have lost his workshop, but he gained immortality through the printed page. His legacy is not measured in guilders or court decrees, but in the countless minds that were opened by the books his press made possible. In the end, Johannes Gutenberg's life serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring narrative. On one hand, it's about the harsh realities of innovation, the financial pitfalls, the legal entanglements, the struggle for recognition. On the other, it's a story of triumph, not in the material sense, but in the lasting impact on human civilization. As we leave this chapter of Gutenberg's life, we're reminded that history, much like his printing business, is a complex blend of success and setback, genius and misfortune, all inked onto the pages of time. Stay tuned, because the saga of the printed word is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue and transformation. And so, as Gutenberg's tale unfolds, we find our erstwhile inventor back in Mainz, licking his wounds, but not entirely defeated. Enter Archbishop Adolf Roman II. Picture him as a medieval patron saint for struggling inventors, albeit with less halo and more political clout. In 1465, Adolf Roman II extended a lifeline to Gutenberg, offering him a modest but stable position in his court. It was the 15th century equivalent of a founding father grant, a pension and a residence, making sure our man didn't end his days in a debtor's prison or worse, obscurity. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. This wasn't a grand return to glory. Gutenberg's life under the Archbishop's wing was a far cry from the bustling workshop days. Still, it was a chance to live out his final years with dignity, away from the financial ruin that had dogged him. In 1468, Gutenberg passed away, a man whose life was a curious blend of triumph and tribulation. Yet, the echoes of his invention would reverberate through history, outliving the man himself by centuries. The real story here isn't just about Gutenberg's personal roller coaster. It's It's about the seismic shift his press triggered, a tectonic plate moving under the feet of society, shaking up the status quo like a medieval rock concert. His press didn't just print pages, it printed possibilities. Think about it. The Renaissance, that glorious explosion of art and science. It wasn't just about pretty pictures and clever thoughts. It was fueled by the rapid spread of ideas. The printing press made it possible for Leonardo da Vinci's sketches and Copernicus's heliocentric proclamations to leap from one learned mind to the next, faster than you can say Eureka. And then there was the Reformation. Martin Luther, armed with his 95 Theses like a theological rock star, nailed them to a church door in 1517 and sent ripples across Europe. But it wasn't Luther's hammer that did the real damage. It was the printing press. Thanks to Gutenberg's legacy, those Theses multiplied faster than rabbits at a spring fair, reaching corners of Europe that Luther himself would never see. The church's monopoly on information crumbled as ordinary people could finally read the Bible in their own languages, a radical notion that turned the established order on its head. But let's not gloss over the messier side. With great power comes great chaos. The printing press was a democratizer, sure, but it was also an amplifier of misinformation. Propaganda became the medieval version of clickbait, spreading as rapidly as the truth, if not faster. The press was a double-edged sword, cutting through ignorance, but also slicing into the social fabric with divisive, incendiary pamphlets. It was the social media of its day, without the cat memes, but with all the political drama. Fast forward to today, and Gutenberg's press is the ancestor of every book, newspaper, and digital article you've ever read. It's the great-great-grandparent of the very device you might be using to consume this story. The printed word's power to inform, inspire, and incite remains as potent as in Gutenberg's time. His press laid the foundation for the information age, setting the stage for everything from the Enlightenment's philosophical debates to the 21st century's digital revolution. But here's the kicker. Gutenberg himself didn't live to see the full scope of his invention's impact. In life, he was just another inventor trying to make ends meet, plagued by financial woes and legal battles. In death, he became a symbol of innovation, a man whose name would eventually be etched into history with the same permanence as the ink on his printed pages. As we wrap up this saga, let's ponder this. What does it say about us that we often celebrate our inventors only after they're gone? Gutenberg's story is a testament to the bittersweet nature of innovation. It's about the struggle of bringing a revolutionary idea to life, the harsh realities of medieval economics, and the enduring legacy that outshines the man himself. Gutenberg's tale is both a romantic legend and a stark reminder of the human cost behind every great achievement. His life was a tapestry woven with the threads of genius and misfortune, triumph and failure. As we look back on his legacy, let's remember that history is not a neat narrative, but a complex web of events, driven by the same forces that shape our world today. Ambition, opportunity, a touch of luck. In the end, Johannes Gutenberg may have faced more setbacks than successes, but his impact was as indelible as the ink on those first printed pages. His story is a testament to the power of perseverance, the relentless drive to push boundaries, and the enduring influence of the written word. So here's to Gutenberg, the man who set the stage for centuries of knowledge and discovery, reminding us that while life may not always follow the script we write, it's the stories we leave behind that truly matter. The sun hasn't even bothered to peek over the endless steppe, but here you are, already awake in your snug little ger. It's a cozy, portable yurt that's seen more of the Mongolian landscape than most people will see of the world. The air inside is thick with the scent of wood smoke and the faint tang of fermented mare's milk. Yes, your morning starts with a whiff of erag, because who needs espresso when you have a traditional dairy cocktail with a kick? You stretch out, feeling the embrace of your deal. This is your all-in-one wardrobe staple, a long, robe-like garment that's as versatile as it is stylish. Forget your designer jeans. This piece of clothing is the real MVP of the 13th century fashion world. It wraps around you like a second skin, with a sash that holds everything together and doubles as a handy place to tuck a knife or some extra dried meat. Mongol warriors don't do pockets, but they do layers, and your deal is pretty much the Swiss Army knife of clothing. Before you can even think about breakfast, you're out of your ger, greeted by the sight of your horse grazing nearby. This isn't just any horse. It's your four-legged Ferrari, your trusty steed, your partner in conquest. Mongols are practically born in the saddle, and by the time you were out of diapers, you were probably galloping across the plains. Riding is in your blood, like some sort of equestrian DNA strand that's been hardwired into your very being. But let's pause to debunk a myth, shall we? The idea that the Mongols were nothing more than a horde of unwashed barbarians is seriously overplayed. Sure, you're no stranger to the rough-and-tumble life, but you're also a master of horsemanship and archery. Your bow isn't just a weapon, it's an extension of your arm, and you can shoot arrows while riding at full gallop. The English longbow might have been impressive, but your composite bow is the stuff of legends, capable of launching a projectile with enough force to puncture armor at 350 yards. Talk about a long-range relationship. Now, let's talk breakfast. It's not exactly a continental spread, but it's enough to fuel your day of conquest. You might start with some seasoned mutton or a bowl of hearty porridge. Grain might be scarce, but you make do with what you've got. The Mongol diet is all about practicality and preservation, turning every bit of available resource into sustenance. You're a nomad, after all, and your life's built on mobility. The entire concept of food miles doesn't even register because your meals move with you. As you eat, the morning light casts a golden hue over the landscape, and you can't help but feel a sense of awe at the vastness around you. This is your kingdom, a boundless expanse of land that's as harsh as it is beautiful. And it's precisely this environment that's shaped the Mongol way of life. You're part of a society that thrives on adaptability, where every day is a new challenge, and every challenge is an opportunity to demonstrate your prowess. While the rest of the world is busy building castles and fortresses, you're living proof that true strength lies in flexibility. Your ancestors figured out that a life on the move meant a life of freedom and opportunity. They traded the sedentary lifestyle for one of eternal motion, and it's this philosophy that allows you to cover incredible distances, up to 100 miles in a single day on horseback. The sun's finally risen, and it's time to saddle up. As you prepare for the day ahead, you can't help but feel a certain kinship with the land. It's a part of you, and you're a part of it, inextricably linked by the endless cycle of nature. The Mongol Empire might still be in its infancy, but there's a sense of destiny in the air, a feeling that you're on the brink of something monumental. So, as you mount your horse and prepare to ride out, remember this. You're not just a warrior. You're a part of a legacy, a living testament to the power of adaptability, resilience, and the sheer audacity to dream big. And while the world may see you as a fearsome conqueror, you know that beneath the armor and the reputation, you're just a nomadic soul with a thirst for adventure and a love for the open road. As the horizon stretches endlessly before you, you feel the pulse of history beneath your feet, or rather, hooves. You're riding out into the vast Mongolian steppe, where the only thing more expansive than the landscape is the ambition of the Mongol Empire. But let's not gallop too far ahead. Today's agenda includes a deep dive into the nitty-gritty of Mongol warfare logistics and communication, where the devil and the genius is in the details. First, let's talk about how a bunch of nomads manage to cover 60 to 100 miles a day. It's not just about having a good horse, although your steed is essentially the equine equivalent of a sports car. The real secret sauce here is the relay system the Mongols perfected, akin to the pit stops of a medieval Tour de France. You see, every warrior had a string of horses. When one got tired, you'd swap it out like a pair of worn-out shoes. This equestrian relay allowed for rapid and sustained movement across the terrain, turning the Mongol army into a mobile force that could outpace news of its own approach. Speaking of news, let's introduce the yam system. No, not a tuberous vegetable, but an ancient chain of communication posts. Imagine a series of way stations, each stocked with fresh horses and riders, ready to relay messages faster than you can say, postal service. This system was the original express mail, ensuring that orders from headquarters zipped across the empire with the speed of a modern-day tweet. The yam network wasn't just an early internet. It was the spinal cord of the Mongol army, linking far-flung units with precision and speed that would make even a modern logistics manager sweat. But it wasn't just speed and mobility that made the Mongols formidable. Let's debunk the myth of the mindless horde, shall we? Sure, the image of countless warriors descending like locusts is dramatic, but it misses the point. The Mongols were strategic maestros, deploying intelligence and cunning as much as brute force. They used scouts and spies, integrating local knowledge with military tactics in a way that would make Sun Tzu nod in approval. They knew when to strike, when to wait, and when to pretend they were retreating before turning the tables in a classic feigned withdrawal. And let's not forget the psychological warfare. Whispers of Mongol ferocity spread ahead of the army, often leading to cities surrendering without a fight. Now, onto the economic cogs turning behind the scenes. Conquest wasn't just about glory, it was about practical empire building. The Mongols understood the value of artisans and craftsmen, offering them tax exemptions and other incentives to ply their trades within the empire. By integrating these skilled workers, the Mongols didn't just conquer, they cultivated. They knew that an empire is only as strong as its economic underpinnings, so they incentivized innovation and craftsmanship, ensuring a steady flow of goods that would keep the empire's heart beating. And let's not ignore the political savvy here. The Mongols didn't just steamroll over societies. They absorbed and adapted, creating a mosaic of cultures under a single banner. They were pragmatists at heart, often allowing local leaders to maintain positions of power in exchange for loyalty and tribute. This wasn't just benevolence, it was smart governance. By co-opting rather than annihilating, the Mongols built a diverse empire that was as adaptable as it was vast. So, while the romantic image of the Mongol horde still persists, it's worth remembering that their true power lay not just in their numbers, but in their brains. They were a well-oiled machine of strategy, speed, and savvy, their empire a testament to the power of adaptability. As you ride across the steppe, remember that the true legacy of the Mongols isn't just written in the battles they won, but in the systems they built and the cultures they connected. And so, the sun sets on another day of conquest and strategy. But fear not, our journey through the annals of Mongol history is far from over. Keep your saddle tight and your mind open, because the steppe has many more stories to tell. As the steppe swallows the sun and the shadows of the Mongol warriors stretch across the plains, you're reminded that even conquerors need to eat. But before you imagine a medieval buffet spread, let's get real about lunch on the move. The Mongol diet is minimalist, to say the least. Forget farm to table. This is more like saddle to mouth. Meet borts, the Mongol warrior's best friend and the original protein bar. It's dried meat, usually beef or mutton, cut thin and hung to air dry until it's as tough as old boots. But don't let its leather-like texture fool you. Borts is a marvel of practicality. Lightweight and long-lasting, it's the perfect trail ration. Just add water, and voila, you've got yourself a meal. Think of it as the ancient version of instant noodles, but with a bit more chew and a lot more protein. Now, let's talk about energy. You're not just munching on meat because it's there. You're fueling a machine. The Mongol army is a high-octane operation, and every calorie counts. Borts is packed with protein, but you're also getting energy from fermented dairy products like erag and yogurt. These aren't just nutritional choices, they're survival tactics. When you're burning through up to 9,000 calories a day galloping across the steppe, every bite is strategic. But why stop at the menu when there's so much more to digest about Mongol life? Let's look at how this army of nomads, often painted as mere barbarians, was actually a paragon of organization. The Mongol military hierarchy was as lean and efficient as their diet. At the top, you've got the Khan, but it's the structure beneath him that deserves a standing ovation. The army was divided into units like a perfectly choreographed dance, with the Tumen as the star performer. Each Tumen consisted of about 10,000 warriors. These weren't just any warriors, mind you. They were seasoned fighters, each handpicked for their skills. Below the Tumen, you had the Minghen, made up of 1,000 men, then the Jaghan at 100, and finally the Arban with 10. This wasn't just a numbers game. It was a masterclass in military efficiency. Now, here's the twist. Promotions weren't about who your daddy was. Nope, the Mongols were all about meritocracy. You earned your stripes on the battlefield, not in the bloodline. If you were a brilliant strategist or a dead-eye shot with a bow, you could climb the ranks, regardless of your birth. It's like a medieval version of America's Got Talent, but with fewer singers and more swords. But let's debunk another myth while we're at it. The Mongols are often portrayed as bloodthirsty marauders, but that's a simplification that misses the real genius of their strategy. Sure, they knew how to swing a sword, but their true weapon was psychological warfare. They were the original masters of fear-mongering, spreading tales of their brutality so effectively that some cities surrendered before the Mongols even showed up. Why waste time and resources on a siege when you can win with a well-placed rumor? And here's the kicker. They understood that sparing lives could be more beneficial than taking them. The Mongols were pragmatic. They knew that a city intact was worth more than a city razed. They often incorporated conquered peoples into their empire, leveraging their skills and local knowledge. This wasn't just about conquest, it was about integration. They'd rather have a skilled artisan working for them than as a casualty of war. So, as you chew on your boards and wash it down with a swig of Erag, remember that the Mongol Empire wasn't built on brute force alone. It was a complex tapestry of strategy, psychology, and adaptability. The Mongols were the ultimate pragmatists, wielding power not just through the sword, but through the mind. And while the world may remember them for their conquests, it's their cunning and their ability to adapt that truly set them apart. As the evening chill settles in and you prepare for another day on the move, you can't help but appreciate the intricate machine you're a part of. This isn't just an army, it's a living, breathing organism, each part working in harmony with the others. The Mongols didn't just conquer land, they conquered the art of war itself, proving that sometimes the pen, or in this case the rumor, really is mightier than the sword. So, saddle up and get ready to ride, because the story of the Mongols is far from over. The empire is vast, the challenges are great, and the adventure is just beginning. Keep your wits sharp and your bowstring tighter, because tomorrow promises more tales of strategy, survival, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the steppe in hues of gold and crimson, you find yourself gearing up for something a little more thrilling than your average horseback ride. Welcome to the Mongol version of a team-building exercise, the Mark Battle. Forget the trust falls and icebreakers. This is a full-on tactical rehearsal where the stakes are as high as the adrenaline is pumping. It's a chance to fine-tune the skills that make the Mongol army the masters of warfare, and today you're diving headfirst into the art of the feigned retreat. Now, the feigned retreat isn't just a clever trick. It's a psychological chess move that would make even the most seasoned general sweat through his chainmail. Imagine leading your enemy into a false sense of security, luring them away from their fortified stronghold like a cat with a laser pointer. The Mongols perfected this tactic, executing it with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watch look sloppy. By pretending to flee, they draw their opponents into a chase, stretching their lines thin and exposing them to a well-timed counterattack. It's the classic bait-and switch, played out on a battlefield instead of a bazaar. This Mark battle isn't just a chance to practice maneuvers. It's about understanding the psychological edge the Mongols wielded like a weapon. Their reputation preceded them, often doing half the work before a single arrow was notched. It was a kind of medieval PR campaign, where the stories of their ruthlessness spread faster than a medieval meme. Why storm a castle when you can have its defenders trembling at the mere thought of your approach? And let's not forget the technological edge. The Mongol composite bow, that marvel of medieval engineering, was the ace up their sleeve. Constructed from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, it packed a punch that would make even the most advanced crossbows of the time look like toys. Capable of firing arrows with lethal precision over long distances, it allowed Mongol warriors to rain destruction from afar, a deadly prelude to their close-quarters combat. But the real genius of the Mongol war machine lay in its adaptability. They weren't just skilled riders and archers, they were masters of integration. When they encountered new weapons or tactics, they didn't dismiss them, they incorporated them. Siege warfare, learned it from the Chinese. Heavy cavalry tactics, borrowed from the Persians. It's like a medieval version of the best of playlist, with the Mongols always looking to improve their repertoire. Yet, while the army was out perfecting the art of war, the political machinery of the Mongol Empire was just as intricate. Enter the Kurultai, the grand assembly that was part parliament, part pep rally, and all about power. This was where decisions were made, khans were elected, and strategies were hashed out. Imagine a bustling medieval conference, with tribal leaders from across the empire gathering to discuss the future, or more accurately, to be persuaded by the most powerful voices in the room. The Kurultai wasn't just about shouting matches and horse trading. It was a crucial mechanism for maintaining unity among the diverse tribes of the Mongol Empire. Power wasn't just handed down like a family heirloom. It was earned, often by consensus, or, failing that, by a show of force that couldn't be ignored. The Khans wielded authority, but their power was as much about influence and negotiation as it was about military might. This political structure was a reflection of the Mongols' pragmatic approach to governance. Rather than impose a one-size-fits-all system, they allowed local customs to flourish, provided tribute was paid and loyalty sworn. It was a strategy of incorporation rather than destruction, a mosaic of cultures bound by a common cause. Speaking of cultural exchange, let's shatter the myth that the Mongols were only about pillage and plunder. Sure, they could raze a city to the ground if needed, but they also facilitated one of the most significant periods of cultural exchange in history. The Mongol Empire was the medieval version of a global trade network, where ideas and innovations flowed as freely as goods. From the Silk Road to the intellectual hubs of the Islamic world, the Mongols were both conquerors and connectors. Artists, scholars, and traders found their paths smoothed by Mongol rule, their work contributing to a vibrant tapestry of shared knowledge and cultural blending. Paper currency, gunpowder, and even pasta recipes made their way across the empire, turning the Mongol domains into a veritable melting pot of innovation. It's the kind of cultural cross-pollination that would make any modern globalist nod with approval. So, as you ride back to camp, the air still buzzing with the energy of the Mark battle, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of the world you're a part of. The Mongols weren't just warriors. They were architects of an empire that redefined the boundaries of human interaction. They were as much about building bridges as they were about breaching walls, their legacy a testament to the power of adaptability and integration. As the firelight flickers and the night deepens, know that the story of the Mongols is far from over. The empire is vast, its challenges many, and the adventure continues. Keep your eyes sharp and your wits sharper, because tomorrow promises more tales of strategy, survival, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. As the firelight flickers and the night deepens, you're drawn to the heart of the camp, where the Mongol warriors gather for a communal feast. This isn't just about filling bellies, it's the social glue that holds the tribe together. Picture a scene more dynamic than a medieval tavern, with warriors swapping stories and laughter cutting through the cool night air. Here, under the vast Mongolian sky, the feast is not merely a meal, but an experience, a chance to revel in camaraderie, to recharge for the challenges ahead. Tonight's menu features a hearty stew, simmering in a large cauldron over the fire. It's a generous mix of mutton, vegetables, and spices, a practical dish designed to feed a crowd with minimal fuss. You might even find some fermented mare's milk being passed around, a reminder that Mongol cuisine is as much about practicality as it is about tradition. The Mongols know how to make do with what the land provides, turning scarcity into sustenance with a creativity that would impress even the most seasoned chef. But this feast is about more than food. It's a celebration of identity and tradition. As the night progresses, the focus shifts from eating to storytelling, the true highlight of the evening. Oral tradition is the Mongol way of preserving history, a living archive of tales passed down through generations. You'll hear stories of Genghis Khan's exploits, of his rise from a humble birth to ruler of one of the greatest empires the world has known. These aren't just bedtime stories. They're the fabric of Mongol identity, woven with threads of myth and reality. Let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The Mongols are often seen as illiterate brutes, but this ignores the rich oral culture they cultivated. Words were their currency, and their stories, a testament to a society that valued the spoken word as much as any written text. This oral tradition was the Wikipedia of its time, a living document that adapted and evolved with each retelling, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. And what about the shamans, the spiritual guides of the Mongol world? They are the bridge between the physical and the spiritual, tasked with interpreting the will of the spirits and guiding the tribe through the uncertainties of life. Shamans hold a revered place in Mongol society, their rituals and ceremonies as much a part of the evening as the feast itself. It's a reminder that for the Mongols, life is as much about the unseen as it is about the tangible. As the stories ebb and flow, you can't help but reflect on the Mongol impact on global history. Sure, their campaigns were destructive, leaving a trail of devastation across the lands they conquered. But to paint them solely as destroyers is to miss the bigger picture. The Mongols were also architects of a connected world, their empire a sprawling network that facilitated trade and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. They were the original globalizers, their influence felt from the Silk Road to the farthest reaches of Europe. Let's put this in perspective. At its height, the Mongol Empire covered over 9 million square miles, making it the largest contiguous empire in history. Their postal system, the Yam, spanned these vast distances, ensuring communication and cohesion across their domains. This wasn't just an empire of conquest. It was an empire of connection, where goods, ideas, and people moved with a freedom that would make a modern customs officer weep. Yet, the Mongol legacy is a complex one, straddling the line between legend and reality. Their destructive campaigns are well documented, but so too is their role in fostering cultural and scientific exchange. They transported scholars and artisans across the empire, facilitating a cross-pollination of ideas that would ultimately enrich the world. The Mongols may have been feared conquerors, but they were also curious travelers, eager to learn and adapt. So, as the evening winds down and the fire burns low, you're left pondering the simplistic label of barbarian often attached to the Mongols. It's a term that fails to capture their ingenuity, their adaptability, and their profound impact on the course of history. They were both destroyers and builders, their empire a testament to the duality of human nature. The Mongols remind us that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, ingenuity, and complexity. As you drift off to sleep, the stories of the Mongols linger in your mind, a reminder of the fascinating tapestry of history. They were a force of nature, reshaping the world with their audacity and vision. So, whether you see them as conquerors or connectors, one thing is clear. The legacy of the Mongols is as vast and varied as the steppe itself, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and adaptability.